Testing 1, 2, 3. Hi everyone, Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia coming to you live from the Chelmsford Senior Center. We have just about 2 or 3 minutes left until moderator John Curlin calls to order the fall session of the annual town meeting. It is this time of the year when we're not really dealing with the main budget per se, but there will be some numbers kicked around, and the magic number tonight is 2.2, as in $2.2 million. That's how much money has been certified as being in the free cash left over from the past fiscal year. Now, if you were with us in the spring, you might remember that we actually approved a deficit budget to the tune of about $500,000 with the understanding that the free cash would become available at this time of the year, and that would be put forward to balance the budget, and then the leftovers would go to a variety of different activities. Some of that will go into the town stabilization fund. Some of it will go to unexpected costs. You're going to hear some scary news about the snow budget and how badly it went over last winter. So that $2.2 million is one of 3 hot topics I see coming up tonight. The other 2 have to do with a pair of zoning bylaws being put forward. We might not get to them tonight, Article 17 and 18, having to do with the way that the town gets funded for its affordable housing. It will give, if passed, it will give developers the option of actually paying the town instead of setting aside affordable housing. That money would go to the housing authority into a new stabilization fund that the housing authority then could use for developing housing. And the other watchword for tonight is study, study, study. There are no fewer than 3 articles tonight that would seek to set up study committees for various things. One would be a feasibility study for the school department's space needs, whether there are too many classrooms, not enough classrooms, what classrooms need to be replaced. Second study would consider a structural and building code analysis of 101 Mill Road. You might remember that was recently purchased by the town for possible future use, but that future use hasn't really been defined yet. And the third study would be to check out the structural analysis of the Chelmsford Forum over on the Billerica line, just off of 129, and see what the future needs for that might be. So here is John Curlin calling the meeting to order. Enjoy it tonight, and we'll see you a little later on.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. What we're going to do now is to check your electronic voting devices. So if the powers that be are ready, you'll see the screen, and you'll vote and make sure that your vote is counted.
For those of you watching from home, we're going to be showing a lot of slide material tonight. You can actually see those online by going to chelmsfordtv.org/live/slides. That's chelmsfordtv.org/live/slides.
While we're waiting for that to, here we go. Okay, thank you. While you're voting, I'd like to announce the location of the fire exits. There are 2 in the front of the building here, on the sides, 2 more further back in the hall, and then the rear exit at the rear of the hall. Okay. I've also been asked to request that if you have to leave the meeting early, kindly drop off your electronic voting devices with the checkers in the front hall.
Well, I said that URL twice and got it wrong twice. It's chelmsfordtv.org/watch.
Okay, thank you for voting. I'm going
tonight's
to
presentation.
verify that we have a quorum for this evening's meeting. I also, for the record, am confirming that I've reviewed the warrant and the constable's return of service, and that the warrant for fall town meeting has been properly posted and served. I would like to welcome all the town meeting reps to tonight's meeting.
I can actually see.
You will notice that we have two screens to try to address the difficulty that some reps have reading the articles on which you will be voting.
Yeah, better with the glasses.
The warrant articles will appear both on screen and with any amendments. However, the voting results will only be on the screen to my right, as I believe. We are continuing with our recent practice to assist the town meeting representatives as well as the viewers at home. You are able to view the slides on the screen, including amendments to warrant articles, on your iPads, laptops, computers, or other smart devices. Simply log on to the building's Wi-Fi by typing in TOC guest, it's right on the screen there, TOC-guest, and using the password Chelmsford Lions, no caps, all one word, and then type in slides.chelmsfordtv.org. For those watching at home, you can also access these slides by typing in http://chelmsfordtv.org/watch/slides/. I would want to thank, it's easy for me to say. I want to thank Chelmsford Telemedia for their assistance in trying to address this issue, and we will continue to work to ensure that all of you have the ability to read not only the warrant articles as originally presented, but also as amended. Speaking of amendments, all amendments will be submitted on the forms, which you can get either from the town clerk or myself. If you know prior to town meeting that you intend to file an amendment, you can see me or Onorina Maloney prior to the meeting for the form, or you can email them to me and I will make the necessary copies and distribute them to town council and the typist so that these will be ready before town meeting begins. And if you can get any proposed amendments to either of us prior to the introduction of that article, town council should have the opportunity to review the amendment, which will expedite the hearing. This form creates an original in 3 copies. The white top copy goes to me, the yellow copy goes to the amendment assistant, pink copy goes to town clerk, and the orange copy is retained by the maker of the amendment. All questions and debate shall emanate from the microphone facing the moderator in the center of the hall and shall go through the moderator. Board or committee members or other town officials or department heads may use other microphones to answer questions or provide information to the meeting. Speakers shall refrain from rhetorical or argumentative questions during the question and answer period and shall only ask questions seeking needed information. The questions should be in the who, what, when, where, and why mode. They should never start or end with, isn't it true? Or wouldn't you admit? Those are best served for debate, and I would prefer not to have to rule questions out of order, but I am bound by the laws and regulations that define our conduct, and I will do my best to enforce them fairly and respectfully. I will allow a reasonable amount of follow-up questions, but I will have to intervene if anyone is asking an excessive number of follow-up questions. With respect to debate, speakers are encouraged to be brief. Please do not refer to any prior speaker by name. The proper designation is to call him or her the previous speaker. Please refrain from personal attacks. Challenging or arguing in opposition of another's position is fair game and is what this meeting is all about. Let us refrain from repeating arguments that have already been made, but new ideas or distinctions are welcome and encouraged. During the discussion of pending litigation will not be permitted unless specifically included in the warrant article being debated. If during the course of debate I observe several speakers on one side of an issue but none in opposition, I will interrupt debate to inquire if there are any who wish to express the opposing position or offer an amendment. If there are none, I shall end debate and move the question. If there is opposition, I will move that party to the front of the line and allow debate to continue. I trust that you will appreciate how this will advance our mutual goal of moving town meeting along. Those who may be next in line, should I ever have to exercise this process, you have my apologies in advance. There will not be any debating from the sponsor's podium. They may answer questions during question and answer and during debate, but should they want to engage in debate, they would have to queue up in line like everyone else. A person should not speak a second time until everyone has had an opportunity to speak, unless the previous speaker wishes to correct or dispute a statement of fact made by a previous speaker. This privilege will be narrowly construed by the moderator. Out of respect for the presenters and your fellow town meeting representatives, I must respectfully request that there be no conversations at your tables. If I can hear background discussions up here, it means that there may be representatives who cannot hear the discussion, questions and answers, or debate. If you need to discuss something, kindly leave the room out of respect for the other representatives. Thank you. At this time, I would like to introduce the two new members of the Finance Committee who were appointed since our last meeting, Elian Consalvo and Anita Tonini. I would also like to introduce our new superintendent of schools, Dr. John Lang. He's here. Because Article 7 deals with grinder pumps, I will be recusing myself, and I am asking that you approve Michael McCall as temporary moderator for that one article. At this time, I will enter a motion to appoint Michael McCall temporary moderator for Article 7 only. Okay, so that should appear on your screen, hopefully. And you now can vote, please. I'll announce it. Okay, the vote is yes, 125, no, a negative, or abstentions. Thank you very much. Yes, it is unanimous. Before we get to the normal order of business, I do have some preliminary acknowledgments to make. So if you will kindly indulge me, I'm going to go to the speaker's podium for a moment. Every fall, we acknowledge town meeting representatives who have volunteered their time, their talents, their judgment to town meeting for a decade or longer, and it is my pleasure to award 4 individuals for their service to the town. The first certificate of achievement is presented to Patricia Zuris. Very much. Second one, Edie Koppenhaver. Thank you, Edie. Next, Karen Kowalski. Thank you, Karen. And last, but certainly not least, Ann McGuigan. Okay.
Mr. Moderator, Tom Gilroy, Precinct 9. I'd like to move that we waive the reading of the article warrants, please.
We have a motion to waive the warrant article readings. Do I have a second? Second? Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Almost unanimous. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gilroy. The first article is the reports of town officers and committees. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, everyone. Article 1 is customarily the first article on every warrant as we gather at fall and spring town meetings to hear reports of town officers and committees. And as you can see this evening, we have 5 reports, brief reports that we presented to you. And I think you'll see the overriding theme of the committee reports is just a tremendous work put in by volunteers on behalf of this community. And then we have an obligatory report of the 5-year forecast in our bylaws that our Finance Director, John Souza, will present. So without any further ado, I'd like to call Tracy Callahan for the Harmony Adventure Park to come up and give a brief report on the fantastic activity that took place as recently as this past weekend.
Thank you very much. Good evening. On behalf of the Harmony Adventure Park Committee, I would just like to say thank you so much for inviting us here tonight to talk about the progress we've made with the park. It was over 18 months ago that we put the committee together to restore the East Chelmsford Park, Harmony Park. We've done some exciting changes to the park. Some state-of-the-art equipment has been added, a picnic pavilion, which we believe will be enjoyed by the softball teams also. It has been a heroic effort by this team of both the volunteers on the committee, corporate sponsors, individuals within town who have financially donated their time and volunteered. So we'd just like to say thank you very, very much for that. A big thank you in particular is to Nick Parley. He has been an active aid for us in this. That is him on top of the picnic pavilion right there with a nail gun. Without him, I can honestly say this never would have looked as amazing as it does. It wouldn't be as creative, and it probably wouldn't have been done at all. So thank you so much, Nick. In closing, I'd just like again to thank our sponsors, volunteers. DPW has been extremely helpful. They've been there every time we've needed them. We also have, just to wrap up, on Thursday, we have our ribbon cutting ceremony. So it starts at 3:30 there. We've got activities for the kids, and we're finally opening the park. There are some areas that will be done in the spring where it's a continuous ongoing fundraiser. We're enhancing the basketball courts with the basketball hoops, doing some, adding some benches, some bike racks, and some additional landscaping. So contributions are always still welcome. Volunteers are always still needed. So thank you so very much for your support.
Thank you very much. And next I'd like to call up Vivian Merrill, the chair of the long-term Chelmsford Dog Park, who's put in many years to achieve the success in private grant funding of over $250,000. So Vivian, if you give us an update.
Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to thank this body for the previous support of this project. Several years ago, you approved designation of a part of the parcel at 54 Richardson Road to be used as a dog park, and you also supported a change in the bylaw to allow off-leash dog use in just this area. Since then, the town has worked in partnership with the Chelmsford Dog Association to redevelop the land, which was a DPW storage area, and it's going to be a 2-acre public dog park. It will be the largest dog park in the greater Lowell area. There's another 1-acre one being developed in Tewksbury, and there is discussion of doing a third one in Billerica. Like Mr. Cohen said, the project was made possible by a series of private grants and other grants that have been awarded to the town. We've also received a lot of private donations from people throughout the greater Lowell area, from as far away as Springfield, Massachusetts, and every community around us. So it's been really, really popular, and we've got a lot of help from a lot of people. On behalf of Eric Merrill, the town's animal control officer, I'd like to thank Town Manager Paul Cohen, Community Development Director Evan Belansky, and DPW Director Gary Persichetti for their professional assistance and support throughout this entire process. The work that should be done by the end of October is the result of all the grants we've received to date. That includes the fencing, ground cover, parking lot, drainage features, plantings, fountains, and a shed that you see today. The brick patio will be enhanced in future phases. Right now you can see phase 1 that's just been currently installed. Future sponsorships, Westford Emergency Veterinary Clinic has agreed to sponsor the Shade Pavilion, which will be installed next spring. A local Eagle Scout candidate is working on plans to provide 2 picnic tables and a kiosk for the park, and other donations and materials have been promised as well. If you'd like to sponsor something, we have forms and lists available on our website at www.chelmsforddogassociation.org. And as more funding is received over time, we'll have more amenities that will be installed.
That's good, right there is good.
We're already receiving requests to use the training area for group events. We hope to have a series of open to the public events of our own. And when this is all said and done, hopefully this will be one more piece of the puzzle to make Chelmsford a destination area that so many other groups have envisioned. So I hope you all agree that we feel the project has positively enhanced this parcel. Please look for future announcements that we're going to have some seminars on, things to look for as your dog is at the park. Know when your dog has to leave. Know what you got to do to make this a positive experience for both you and your dog. And we'll also have those recorded by Chelmsford Telemedia and available on DVD so that anybody can watch them. We'll have grand opening announcements probably starting in January. We hope to have a grand opening at the beginning of April, depending on what the winter does with everything. And you get to listen to an even longer version of this then. So, in short, thank you so much for giving us all this opportunity. And if you'd like more information, you can send me an email at cda@chelmsforddogassociation.org. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to call upon Pete Padula, who's the well-known executive director now of Chelmsford Telemedia, who's going to give an important presentation regarding preserving some of our video archives. So, Pete.
Yeah. Here's my version. These, I didn't get that.
Hello. Yeah, I want to talk to you just real quickly about something we're calling the Government Archive Project. So if you see the word GAP up there, that's our little acronym for the Government Archive Project. And so what is the GAP? The GAP is a digital video archive of all the Chelmsford government meetings, and we've tried to make that viewable, accessible, and searchable by the public. Okay. Oops, that was fast. And how did this project get started? Well, we never can quite remember exactly. I think it was Janet Askenberg's idea. I think maybe Pat Wojcik was involved. In any case, I'm not sure, but someone came to Telemedia over a year ago, about 18 months ago, and said, could we do this? Wouldn't it be nice to have all those old historical selectmen, school committee, et cetera, all those meetings in a place where everyone could get them readily and easily? And at first we were a little hesitant, but because we weren't quite sure we could do it or that it would be too much work, but eventually we realized we thought we could. So this idea was brought to us, and we agreed that we could try to help make it happen. Why would we want to do this? Well, to preserve a great part of Chelmsford's municipal history, also to allow for greater transparency in our government. If you want to go back and check the facts, you can do that. And also, it's really kind of fun, and I think that shouldn't be lost in all of this. It seems like it might be kind of a dry project, but really it's actually kind of fun to look back at some of this stuff. For example, if you look way back at this meeting from 1995, you see one of these giant cameras right in the middle of the room, which was right in our shot. Hopefully we do a little bit better than that. There's the camera right there. And then Bob, I'm going to pick on you again. There's Bob Joyce from 20 years ago looking, Bob, you've aged really well.
I had hair.
Okay, but not to be outdone by Bob, there's Dennis McHugh from 1996. And if you notice, the room is packed. I don't know what was going on that night, but it was a standing room only thing. And then there's Sam Polton, who's still a town meeting rep. So you see history, history is not just history, it's still the present. Peggy Dunn,
still involved. Hello, Peggy. Susan Gates, I don't think she's here tonight, but as you know, she's a member of our board and was a member of the selectmen for many years. And then the town's finance director, John Souza, from 1996, 2 decades ago. And then Bill Griffin. I think Bill's probably here. If he's not, he would be. He's usually around, involved. And if you notice, this room looks a little bit different, the picture in this slide. That's because, oops, I previewed myself. That was the inaugural meeting at our Parker TV studio way back in 1997. And the man at the podium is our own Kelly Beatty, who's here doing the commentary tonight, and as you know, is quite involved with the town. So you see, it's really kind of fun to look back through some of these old tapes. Most of them are on tape, some of them are on DVD. So what is the process? We convert the VHS or the analog media to digital. We take DVDs and we convert those to video files. We edit them really quickly. We'd really just trim the beginning and the end. We label them, equalize the audio, upload them to the web, and then tag them with keywords, okay? And this is the room we've set up at the Parker Studio for this process. I have to thank Connie Sylvia, Amy Totten, and Betty Matson, who are our team of volunteers that have really been pushing this process forward. I also have to thank Janet Askenberg. She's been doing the tagging, which is entering the keywords, basically matching the meeting minutes, I think, or was it the agendas, minutes, one of those, whatever we have on record, and just saying who was at the meeting. So when you go to the website, you could type in, you know, Paul Cohen, and everything where Paul Cohen appeared would come up. If you were so moved. So, where is this archive? It's being hosted by archive.org. The website is there. I passed out a piece of paper. We had a hard time getting the black and white version of the PowerPoint into your book. You can go to that website. Also on the piece of paper on each of your tables, you can reach it through the Chelmsford Telemedia website as well. And remarkably, I'm about as amazed as this as anyone. We have already we're almost done with all of the selectmen's meetings. When I say that, there's a little qualifier, all the ones that aren't already in a digital format. For the last 5 years, we already have those. They're not in the archive yet, but it's going to be an easy process. So we started at the beginning. And really, Connie, Amy, and Betty have been really working very hard to make this happen. So 142 selectmen meetings are online right now. That's starting from the beginning. And Janet's tagged almost 50 of them, so those are searchable. The process, there are 2 parts of the process, so they don't have to happen at the same time. And why am I here? Not only to tell you about this, but also to see if anybody wants to help. Because we're not done with the selectmen, then there's school committee, there's various town meetings, there's planning board, and all sorts of other things that need to get put up. I had originally presented to you guys and said I thought it might take 5 years, but now I think that we can actually get it done much sooner. Maybe 2 or 3, we're not sure. We'll see how it goes. Volunteers tend to come and go, although Connie, Amy, and Betty have been really quite diligent. Same with Janet. So if anyone's interested, contact anybody that can get you in touch with the studio. Me, Dan Sylvia has been helping a lot. There's the number, and that's really it. So thanks.
Okay, our next presentation is from the 7 North Road Committee. This is a follow-up from a previous town meeting action where the town meeting a year ago expressed its desire to have an independent committee come in and examine the parcel. And I think, as you'll see in a few moments, they've done tremendous work. So I'd call upon Ed Atchison to come up and give the presentation this evening.
Thank you. As was just stated, the committee was formed back in January with a mission to go out, solicit information and ideas from the citizens of the town of Chelmsford and the organizations that are a part of Chelmsford to find out what should be done with that property at 7 North Road. So the committee was formed, and these are the members of it. We've had a couple of personnel changes over time, but this is the what wound up being the final version of the group. Everyone worked very hard. We're all dedicated to this project and getting a result. Again, just a quick review of the property. We had to know what the limitations were for it, its size, the easements, zoning, public zoning, what other restrictions were in there. For example, it's in the Chelmsford Historic District, so anything that goes on there has to go before that committee. We set a timeline to make sure we get things done, and we pretty much follow this guideline to the letter. And we are very successful in doing that, holding multiple meetings, sometimes 1 or 2 a week, to get information from the public. And so what did we accomplish? Well, we put out a website that has questions and answers. We know a lot of people have visited. Proposal guide, if you wanted to make a proposal, here's a suggestion, a way to do that. We had links to the other sites that had to do with that property, so the zoning, there were links to that, the zoning, the historic districts, so you could look at requirements under their, I guess, under their governance. There's contact information, so all the member names, phone numbers, emails were there. We also had an email account set up specifically for 7 North Road. We had an article published in the Lowell Sun. We did submit them to other papers. We don't know if they got printed or not because we never saw them. Also, we sent out letters to abutters and users of the local area, so those who use the Chelmsford Common, such as the farmers market and band and other activities that went on there. We sent letters out to them soliciting requests for what they think should be done with that property. We appeared on television on the Town Talk, posted on the bulletin board for the Chelmsford Cable Television, and as I said, we had lots of meetings through that process. So the requests were, what's your idea? How will the community benefit from your idea? Who will fund it? And who's going to maintain it? So with email, we got a whopping 11 emails for suggestions. We did get a couple of handwritten notes that were passed off to us. I did get, and a couple of us did get 1 or 2 phone calls. We had 3 groups or 3 representatives come in and talk to us. One was from the Chelmsford Garden Club, who came in with a nice detailed site plan for what they'd like to do. The Chelmsford Parade Committee came in and talked about moving the toll house over there and using that site as a proper location for the toll house. And then Karen, who just got an award here, came in with she did a lot of hard work on looking at putting an information center and restroom there, similar to the one that's in Concord. She did a great job with that. She provided us pictures and everything, and some contact information for that proposal. And then, of course, there was the one-on-one contact that each of us had as we walked through our community here, and people would tell us what should and what shouldn't go there. The top 10 options that we got, we put together and had a survey and posted the survey out on Facebook just to get a feel for what the general consensus was of what should be there. And of the top responses, pretty much leave it as kind of green space, landscape it with trees, grass, bushes, some nice things there, maybe some park benches, some tables for backgammon and chess and those type of things. Next was move the toll house so it could have its own individual spot there or make way for something different. Make sure there's some historical markers there. Recognize that the fire station was there at one time. Then there was the old center school that used to be there back many years ago, way, way before my time. And maybe even replant that beech tree there. Put a new structure in there for storage for band instruments for the town concerts and other type of storage for decorations for holidays. Plus maybe have a central entertainment feature down there, like a small amphitheater or a small performing area. If you ever stand on the back of that lot and look up, you can see this beautiful slope that's nice where people can sit and put blankets and enjoy some type of entertainment that would go on there. And then of course there was always the just leave it as it is, let the grass grow, the weeds grow, whatever, and leave it natural. So we took the results of all those surveys, and pretty much the top 3 were the landscaping with the grass, trees, shrubs. And when you tie it in with the proposal that came in from the Chelmsford Garden Club, that seemed to work very well. Historical markers, we know that's important. Chelmsford likes to maintain its history. and then consider something for some type of entertainment purpose down in that property too. The other advantage of some of the ideas that came out is it also leaves space open for future Eagle Scout projects or Gold and Silver Award for Girl Scout projects. So recommendations that were coming that we presented was first the Chelmsford Garden Club came before us with some more additional information. And they came with all the costing and everything. We knew the number one thing we couldn't do was spend any town money. We didn't want to come before town and say we need $150,000 or $1.5 million to put something up. We knew it had to all come from donations and private funding. So the Chelmsford Garden Club is putting up a lot of money for this project. They're also going to do all the cost management or the fundraising for all the things that go on there. And from what I understand, they've already made a great deal of progress in that space. So their plan is to add benches, tables, plants, various kind of trees, and the plan for the trees are not just a maple tree or an oak tree, but unique flowering trees, ones we don't see too often around the area that have a lot of color to them through different times of the year that's pleasing to the eye, as well as all the other plants and shrubs that will be planted in there too. So there'll always be something that's there that's beautiful, something that's changing and evolving over the seasons. The only maintenance part of this to the town would be for the water, electric, and lawn care with some of their plans is put some backlighting, have a sprinkler system, and then of course is the mowing the lawn. There were a couple of additional options that we proposed as well. One is the move the toll house over there so at a location of its own, have a better view as people would come in the center of town, maybe revive it as an information center. And option number 2 is to put the entertainment down in that lower portion of the property for perhaps either just a stonework presentation area or perhaps put in a amphitheater with a half gazebo or something in there for performances. And so this is pretty much the presentation we gave to the selectmen, and I thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And our final presentation under Article 1 reports is our statutory requirement under our town bylaws for our 5-year financial forecast. And they introduced John Souza, our finance director, who'll be making this presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'd like to present you with some highlights of our updated 5-year financial forecast. In this presentation, we'll be taking a look at a summary of our revenue sources, expenditure trends, and then look at the overall forecast. Starting with revenue for FY17, our largest source continues to be local property taxes. And under state law, we start with our levy base of just about $85.5 million, which is a historical figure that's based on the prior year's levy limit. And then if you add the 2.5% increase, which is just over $2 million, and then add estimated new growth of $1.3 million, and then our excluded debt of $4.49 million, you have just under $94 million that can be raised through property taxes. Our excluded debt declines about $80,000 in fiscal year 17, and as we'll see in a chart later, it continues a downward trend each year as we continue paying down existing loans for the school project, sewer, and DPW project. On this slide, we'll take a look at state aid. It's our second largest revenue source for the town. Chapter 78 for education is still the largest component, and we're estimating that Chapter 70 will increase roughly $152,000 for the new year to $10.4 million, and also general municipal aid, formerly lottery aid, will increase roughly $171,000. It should be noted that state aid still remains uncertain at this point. The next revenue category is available funds, and this just hits some of the highlights. Child care, the child care fund, we're planning an 8.9% increase to fund increases in health insurance for child care employees. We also have $2.4 million planned from the sewer betterment and capital construction funds to support debt service, betterment funded debt service. And then also the forecast includes a $500,000 transfer from the stabilization fund that will be replenished from free cash. On the next slide, we look at local receipts. That's the last category. And as we've said in past meetings, motor vehicle excise tax still represents over 50% of all local receipts. Total local receipts are estimated to increase about $282,000, or just over 3% for the year. So if we bring all four of those categories together, total revenue for FY17 is estimated around $122.5 million. Moving on to expenditures, some of the highlights. For general government personnel, the forecast includes step increases, and for eligible personnel on a 2% cost of living for each year. General government expenses are estimated at a 0 increase at this time for fiscal year 17, and then 2% in the remaining 4 years. The Chelmsford Public Schools budget, it's estimated for FY17 to be based on this current year's budget plus $1.2 million, and then successive years are factored in at 3%. Our Neshoba assessment is estimated at 8.9% for FY17. It's based on, we've seen a rising trend there for enrollment, but of course it's all going to depend on what the actual student population count that will be that was taken earlier this month, once that's reported to the Department of Ed. And then debt service. As if you've looked at the forecast before, you know that we break it up into 3 different categories: excluded debt, non-excluded debt, and betterment funded debt. Excluded debt is used to finance the sewer, school, and public works facilities projects wherever voters have approved a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion. And then if we look at this column chart, you can see excluded debt is shown in red on the chart. So you can see graphically when you look at this, excluded debt dropped about $500,000 this current fiscal year that we're in, and then it's going to continue to decline each year as we go forward. Non-excluded debt is shown in blue, and its non-excluded debt is $7.06 million this year, and we expect it to remain around $7.2 million for the next 2 fiscal years, and then it's going to take a steep drop in fiscal 19 once we retire the bonds for Adams Library and the Center School projects. Projected debt service in this chart assumes that we'll continue to borrow around $3 million annually for capital improvements. And then finally, betterment funded debt that you see on top is shown in yellow. And as the name implies, this is debt service for all the sewer project phases that were financed after 2005. And this is paid not out of the general fund, but it's paid through sewer betterment and sewer capital improvement revenues. And you can see that that's pretty level. It's going to be around $2.4 million for the next 5 fiscal years. And then moving on to employee benefits, our Middlesex retirement assessment for FY17 increases $456,000 to $7.5 million. It's a known number this year because of the cycle of the valuation. And we are on track to extinguish our unfunded pension liability through Middlesex by 2035. It's important to note Middlesex will have a new actuarial valuation performed this coming January 1st in 2016, and that number will determine our assessments for fiscal year 18 and 19. As I mentioned earlier, all indications are at this point that our health insurance premiums are expected to increase somewhere in the neighborhood of just under 9%. So that accounts for $930,000 for fiscal year 17. The forecast assumes 5% just as a model after that. So if we pull it all together, all the different expenditure categories, all of the expenses total $122.5 million. And then going to this slide, this is a little difficult to read from, I know you have it in your packet, so we're going to go right to the summary screen. And you can see that at this point, we're projecting that for FY17, it'll be possible to produce a balanced budget. It will be very tight. For the next 4 years, at this point, under the forecast, we're projecting a small balance. And you can see that if you look at 3 of the 4 years, it amounts, if you look at it as a percentage of budget, most of the years it's like 0.2%. So just That's a little more positive than it's been in past years. If we look at the next slide, it's important to remember whenever you look at a long-term forecast like this, there's always uncertain factors. So on the revenue side, we have state aid. As I mentioned earlier, we'll know more about this when Governor Baker releases the state budget in late January. Also on the expense side, we have our Neshoba assessment and also our health insurance. We won't actually know the number till probably sometime in February. One thing that's important to note that our current year, this year, our health insurance budget for all employees and all retirees is $10.5 million. So every 1% that it increases is $105,000. So you can see how that adds up very rapidly. All of these things can have a huge impact on the town budget. Then moving on to reserves, the financial plan includes maintaining a healthy stabilization fund and dedicating reserves whenever possible to the stabilization fund and extraordinary capital. You can see that the town ended fiscal year 15 with just over $2.2 million in free cash. The amount of free cash varies from year to year. And if you look on this slide, you'll see that over time it has varied. In the last fiscal year, approximately 50% of free cash resulted from higher than anticipated revenue for motor vehicle excise permits, as well as a $400,000 one-time tax lien payment for the former Glenview Sand and Gravel site. If you look at this chart, you'll see we have free cash listed as a percent of budget, and you can see with the exception of all of the, with 2012 and 2013, free cash has usually come in just under 2% of budget. Moving on to stabilization, this chart shows the history of the General Stabilization Fund since 2006 and then the updated plan going forward. There were no withdrawals from the fund in fiscal year 15, and you may recall town meeting voted to transfer $1.24 million into the fund, and then we had investment earnings of about $169,000. So we closed fiscal year 15 with a stabilization balance of just over $8.6 million. At the beginning of fiscal year 16, $500,000 was transferred out as voted to support the current year operating budget, and this amount will be replenished tonight under Article 13 if town meeting votes to do so. The goal is to maintain the fund at a midpoint of 7.5%, as and our town financial policies dictate that it should be somewhere between 5 and 10%. If you look on this chart, we show the stabilization fund as plotted out over time for each year as a percentage of total budgeted operating revenue, with the current fiscal year is shown in red. So when you look at the overall trend here, you see that we've made a lot of progress since the recessionary years of 2008 and 2009, but it's important that we continue to contribute to the fund to maintain that level around 7.5%. What this does for the town is it helps us to retain our bond rating, it'll reduce our future long-term borrowing costs, and it gives us financial flexibility so that we're able to respond to unforeseen emergencies or opportunities that may come up. This next slide looks at the first of two of the town's major long-term liabilities. The first one we wanted to talk about is our unfunded pension liability, and you can see it's $88.38 million. As I mentioned earlier, the next actuarial study that Middlesex Retirement will perform will be done this coming January 1st. And one of the concerns is that when the financial markets are currently down for this year. Hopefully they'll recover, but unless they rebound before the end of 2015, you could see we might have a situation where our pension liability will grow if the system doesn't earn the assumed rate of return. On the next slide, we have the second major liability, which is our OPEB liability, which is the cost of providing health insurance to current and future retirees. We just received a new report late last week, and it estimated our current OPEB liability at $92.9 million. That's calculated using data as of December 31st, 2014. That's an increase you can see of about $7.5 million since we, as you know, the town's required to have actuarial valuations performed every 2 years, and we use these numbers, our auditors use them in our financial reports. The increase is the result of a couple of things: higher prescription drug costs and also utilization rates. and also demographic changes. And finally, the point that's a little cut off on the bottom there says that it's important to note that the $1 million annual contribution that we've been making into our OPEB liability trust fund equals roughly about 1/3 of what we would be required to fully pay this liability off over a 30-year period. So if we go to this next slide, you can see if you add these two liabilities together, retirement and OPEB, the total is over $181 million. So although the Commonwealth has adopted pension reform legislation, it's critical going forward that the legislature adopt meaningful OPEB reform for all municipalities, including Chelmsford. And then here's our OPEB liability trust funding plan. You can see that the town's OPEB assets have been invested in the Commonwealth's PRIT, or Pension Reserves Investment Trust, for just under 3 years now since receiving town meeting authorization. Last year, the town earned $134,000 during fiscal year 15, and we closed the year with just over $3.8 million in the OPEB trust fund. The plan going forward, as I mentioned, if you look in that middle column, calls for us to contribute $1 million annually from the general fund, plus an amount to fund from the SOAR Enterprise Fund for SOAR employees. And you see that if you look down at the bottom, if we continue investing this amount into this fund, assuming a rate of return, we will be able to grow these contributions into nearly $24 million at the end of that period. By continuing to fund OPEB, we'll be able to avoid having retiree health insurance consume a larger and larger share of the town's operating budget. And then finally, this graph shows the OPEB trust fund assets that we just talked about, shown in green on the bottom of the slide. And then it's shown plotted on top of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, or unfunded OPEB liability, that's shown in red. So in the previous slide, we talked about how we would accumulate $24 million if all the assumptions were met. And even though that's a substantial amount of money, it just shows you that it pales in comparison when you look at it over to what our unfunded liability could grow to by 2025. So that concludes the 5-year forecast.
Thank you, John. And just as a conclusion to Article 1, as we enter the actions for financial articles of the meeting, just wanted to point out in one summary slide, or two slides. One is our current fund balances. Right now, our general fund free cash is at $2.2 million. Our general stabilization fund balance is $8.239 million. Our sewer enterprise fund free cash is just over $900,000, and our golf course enterprise fund is just under $30,000. And then the last slide, which is a suggestion was made at last Wednesday evening's town meeting information session by Tom Moran. He asked that we assemble a listing of all the appropriations on one slide. So this sort of gives you a roadmap of how we'll go through the articles this evening. The custom in Chelmsford continues to be that every year the town's fund balance is certified free cash. We as a conservative community don't leave it in that fund. We move it into the stabilization fund because that requires a 2/3 vote as opposed to a majority vote. So that's why we distribute all of the free cash either to particular articles or into the stabilization fund. And so this gives you a listing of all the financial requests for the meeting for your consideration this fall. And that concludes the presentations on Article 1. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Article 2?
Okay, Article 2 is the E-rate revenue to the school department. Many of you who follow town meeting, this is a traditional article at the fall annual town meeting where we take the amount of funding that comes in during the previous fiscal year under the E-rate program and then provide it to the schools for use for telecommunications and technology purposes. Just to describe what E-rate is, it's a federal program. It's administered by the Federal Communication Commission, and it provides a discount to schools for affordable telecommunication and internet services. And the amount that's provided to a community depends upon its expenditures and the demographics of a community. And as you can see, the school department has been very diligent in terms of making sure we're receiving the most that we can receive. And as you can see, this year is the highest amount we've received at just over $79,000. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now is the time for question and answers. If anyone has any questions for the proponent, please approach the microphone. There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action.
Is there any discussion? There being none, we will now vote. An affirmative vote is to transfer the sum of $79,076 in E-rate grant funds to the school department. Please vote now.
This is Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. You're going to see 2 or 3 articles here in the warrant tonight of 18 articles that are regular things that come before town meeting every fall. And as you will no doubt notice, there won't be a lot of discussion because the town meeting reps have gotten quite used to these and understand what's going on, and they move kind of briskly through them. This E-rate transfer is one such article. I want to mention that Article 4 coming up has to do with setting aside money for collective bargaining agreements. That has been withdrawn.
The article is unanimously passed, 131 to nothing. Article 3?
Article 3 is to address the fiscal year 2015 snow and ice deficit. The last 2 mornings have sort of brought back those feelings of what happened last February, and so just a reminder, it was an historic winter. Our budget of $1.14 million was overexpended by 1.8 to a total of $1.8 million, which left us with a gross deficit of $655,000. Through the efforts of the governor and the state officials, they were able to obtain, after repeated requests, FEMA assistance into the state from the federal government by the declaration of emergency assistance. We received $202,517 to apply to our deficit. Back in July, when the governor submitted his final closeout budget for supplemental funding to close out the state fiscal year, including the state's snow and ice deficit, he included in that appropriation request $25 million to provide assistance to cities and towns for the extraordinary winter. And that would have provided Chelmsford with $146,733. Well, what happened was from July, when the governor submitted that request, to the present time, the state's financial situation in terms of their revenue forecasts have had a setback, and that was really due to the problems with the stock market in August. And so now the state has made a downward revision in its revenue estimates for the year. And so as a result of that, right now the budget legislation is in conference committee. It's been passed by the House and by the Senate. Neither version included the funding for cities and towns, so therefore it's not going to be there when they complete action on it later this month. And the reason, quite frankly, is the fact that the state is seeking to supplant its stabilization fund, or rainy day fund, rather than to assist us in our rainy day fund in cities and towns. So therefore that leaves us with a net deficit of $452,698. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now is the time for question and answers. Does anyone have any questions for the proponent? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends this article unanimously.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action.
Now is the time for discussion. There being none, we will vote. An affirmative vote would be to appropriate $452,698 from the free cash to pay the snow and ice deficit.
As you look at those numbers there on the board, it's interesting to me that what we're now budgeting for snow and ice is roughly 1% of the budget. That is about 1.2
Final vote
million
is 132
out of
in
a
favor,
$122
no in
million
opposition,
budget.
no abstentions, unanimously passes. Thank you. Article 4.
Mr. Moderator, we're seeking no action under Article 4. This is an article for which would be providing funding for collective bargaining agreements. Thus far, the town has still not reached agreement with our 2 police unions. We're now in the 3rd year without an agreement. We're before the state Joint Labor Management Committee for mediation and arbitration. So we'll have no action at this time. You will see in a later article, we will be putting money into the stabilization fund to address the settlement when such an agreement is reached and brought before you for consideration at a later date. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Article 5, please.
Article 5 is to amend the current fiscal year operating budget. We left town meeting in the spring with a balanced budget. At this point in time, as we come into fall town meeting, a quarter of the way into the fiscal year, we have only one adjustment to the operating budget, and that pertains to the school department. We're requesting an appropriation of $500,000 of an increase into the school department to meet extraordinary special education expenses. Let me just explain briefly what happened here. The request is $500,000. About $200,000 of that request occurred as a result of students coming into the district over the summer as a result of the real estate transactions. And then the balance of $300,000 is a result of the changes in the education plans for students that arose after the submittal of the budget by the school committee in January of last year to date. So that's a $500,000 request. We ask for your consideration. The second half of the article, as you can see, it's 2 parts. The $500,000 for the school department, and then you can see we're transferring $793,572 from free cash to defray the town charges. So basically, the $793, it's it meets that $500,000 for the schools that we're requesting, and then the balance of $293,572 would bring our tax levy below the Proposition 2.5 levy limit by, as you can see, almost $300,000. That is a directive that's been issued to me by the Board of Selectmen, in which they were seeking to provide some relief to the community upon the ever-increasing property tax. And so this would provide an amount below what would be the ultimate that we could raise without a override or debt exclusion. It's not to suggest that your tax bills are going to go down. That's not going to happen. The tax rates will be submitted to the state later in November, early December, once the actions of town meeting are completed and the assessors receive certification of their assessments for the year. There'll be a classification hearing before the Board of Selectmen in late November, early December. The Board of Selectmen will decide on how to classify the tax rate, and then we'll submit it for state approval so that we can get the actual bills out before the end of December. So that's what's being requested under this article, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Now is the opportunity to ask questions of the proponent.
Thank you. Scott Davidson, Precinct 3. What would be, on average, for a homeowner, the $293,752? How much would the typical homeowner be expected to save?
Okay. Let me give the typical average single-family property tax bill for a home that's assessed at roughly $330,000. The average bill for the past year was $6,329. Okay? So if all things stayed constant, which we know that they don't, but if all the values stayed constant and you were to put a 2.5% above the $6,329, your tax bill would go up $150. Okay? What will happen in this case is every $100,000 below the levy limit saves $7 on the average bill. So instead of the bill going up $150, it would go up basically $129. So basically, 7 times 303 is $21. So the average single-family bill would be $21. Obviously, if it's a house that's valued at less than that, it's going to be less than $21, less than the full amount. And obviously, if it's a large commercial property, such as in the community, it would obviously be much greater than that. But the average single-family bill metric, instead of it being a $150 increase, the increase would be $129.
Thank you.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7. This is questions.
Yes, it is.
My question is to the school administration, if that's okay?
Yes. Well, let's hear the question.
Okay, my question is, I understand that this $500,000 is needed for reasons in the special ed budget, but I'd like to understand what the administration has done to look at other areas in the budget and determine there's no place else to find savings.
Mr. Moderator, call upon Dr. Lang to come up and address this
Certainly.
question.
Okay.
Excuse me, thank you very much. My first thing here tonight, I'd like to thank everyone for thank you for having me. One of the things that we started to do over the last probably two and a half months since I've been here, and Michelle Cresser's also started new in the business office, is really started diving into the school department budget that was prepared for fiscal 16. One of the areas that we identified early on was in the special education department, and it basically is an underfunding of the tuitions for our out-of-district special education students. We have approximately 100 students in the district that we cannot provide a proper program for in the Chelmsford Public Schools, and they attend other either private or public schools in other districts across the state. That's our obligation. So when we determined, we did have a few students come in over the summertime that actually transferred into the district that came from other districts that already had education plans calling for them to be educated in another program. We then become fiscally responsible for providing that tuition. In addition to that, there were several students in our program last year that a determination was made that they weren't making proper progress and they needed to go to an out-of-district placement. In total, those 10 students actually added up to about $500,000, $498,000 of extra cost that wasn't included within the fiscal 16 budget. One of the things that we have done, obviously, over the last couple of months is gone very closely through our budget to try to find if there were any areas where there might be overages or flexibility to try to move funds around. And unfortunately, we have not been able to find that. As we've been going through the fiscal 16 budget, on the personnel side, it actually looks like it's in good shape, and we'll be presenting that to the school committee tomorrow. But we are, finding issues with this out-of-district tuition, as well as even transportation costs for special education students are coming in higher than projected. So quite honestly, we do not have the funding within the fiscal 16 budget to cover this extra $500,000 of tuitions for the year. Would be happy to answer more questions for you, but would respectfully request your support of providing the additional funding to the school district at this time.
Thank you.
Laura Merrill, Precinct 2. Question to the school committee. If we grant you this $500,000, we've heard in the past at school committee meetings that you will submit for any special need, special education costs for reimbursement, and some percentage of that will come back. How does that factor into your next year's budget if you have a higher amount of money coming back for reimbursement through this?
Sure. The reimbursement actually would not come in fiscal 16. So any of the actual costs that are incurred this fiscal year would be, a portion of them would be reimbursed and come back to us in 17. So we would actually, in the fiscal 17 budget presentation, have a line item indicating what our circuit breaker reimbursement would be, and you would see that that dollar amount would be higher in 17 to offset some of the fiscal 17 costs. Unfortunately, you do have to spend the money in 16 to then be able to get the reimbursement in 17. For all practical purposes, what this $500,000 of extra tuition is doing is really creating a structural deficit in 16 that we're going to have to address in 17. Hopefully, a portion of that will be offset by the additional circuit breaker funds in 17, but we do have to wait the year for those funds.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Hi, Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. Does the school committee have, or the school department have a cap on how many SPED students they will accept? Ever?
No, there is no cap, and we are required by law to educate any student that resides in the town of Chelmsford, whose residence is in the town of Chelmsford, to provide them with either regular education or, if they qualify, a special education. As is the case with a few of these students, it's very difficult to predict when a student is going to move into your community and what the actual cost of that student might be. And that was the case with a few of these students. When you have youngsters that come in from another community that are already in and out of district placement, basically the the other district has made the programmatic placement of the student in the out-of-district school, but the new district assumes financial responsibility for that. The same thing would happen if we had a Chelmsford student who moved to Billerica or Tingsboro. Once that student moves, that district has to pick up the financial cost of that student. There really is no way to cap that, and that's what's very difficult when it comes to budgeting special education program costs.
And by law, is this state mandated?
Yes, of course. State and federal.
Any additional questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Yes, the Finance Committee recommends this article unanimously.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Selectmen recommend favorable action.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this article? There being none, we shall vote. An affirmative vote would be to transfer $793,572, of which $500 would go to the public schools for special education. $293,572 would go to reduce the tax levy.
It's an interesting turn of events here. Imagine a year ago where we stood with regard to the school committee and the sort of divisive debate that had erupted over the management of funding. This new superintendent and perhaps more transparency, you're seeing the town meeting representatives being much more understanding and accommodating of the extra costs
Vote
that are
is
being
129 yes, 7 no, no abstentions. The article passes. Article 6, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 6 is to transfer funds from free cash into the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund. Again, this is an annual action at the fall town meeting. What this comes from is our financial plan for debt service for the sewer project is based upon 3 components. The debt exclusions that were passed in the early phases of the project, the capital sewer fee that's applied to the end, as well as the betterments along the way, fund those 3 components of our project. What happens is, and included in our financial plan, is the interest earnings on the sewer capital improvement and betterment accounts. Under Mass General Law, all funds, unless otherwise provided by law, go to the general fund. And so the interest earnings by law go to the general fund, but since they're included in our funding plan, we every fall take the actual amount that was received on those accounts in the prior year and put them into our account. And during this past year, the amount was the amount requested of $191,421. And the good news is our financial plan for the sewer debt is on schedule, and there is no proposed change in the foreseeable future to increase the capital assessment fee. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Are there any questions for the proponent? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends this article unanimously.
Thank you. Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this article? There being none, we shall vote. An affirmative vote would be to transfer $191,421 from free cash to the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund. Final tally is 136 in favor, no opposition, no abstentions, unanimously passes. We're now going to be dealing with Article 7, which is a grinder pump article. So at this point, I will be recusing myself, and thanks to your vote, Michael McCall will be serving as temporary moderator for this article alone.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
My age has caught up with me, so bear with me. Again, thank you for the honor of letting me serve as the temporary moderator. Now under Article 7, with regard to the amendment of the new grinder pump bylaw, I would ask the proponent, town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Many of you may recall at the spring annual town meeting, we sort of took a pause on the funding appropriation request to deal with the sewer grinder pumps. The Board of Selectmen reconstituted the sewer grinder pump advisory committee. They met diligently over the summer, came to a consensus on its recommendations, and you have the text of it in your handout. And so now I'd like to turn over the presentation to Tom Gilroy, who chaired the committee, to report on its actions.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Back last spring, we got the grinder pump study committee together again. The members were myself, Bob Chevalier, Ed Safran, Daniel Burke, Peggy Dunn, Curtis Barton, Dave Foley, George Dixon was our selectman liaison, and Joyce Cody was our secretary administrator. We held our meetings on Chelmsford Telemedia. We invited the public to attend. We had many grinder pump owners come in and give some of their stories, and we tried to take it all into consideration. And what we're trying to do here is to amend the bylaws so that it represents the responsibilities of not only the town, but the grinder pump owners also. I want to skip by this part here because this is all. Okay, mission statement. Recommend town bylaw revisions. We updated the sewer use regulations, which is still an ongoing process within the DPW. We're modifying Weston and Sampson's scope of work, and we developed language for the town warrant. This particular language was submitted to the Board of Selectmen, presented to them. It was also given to the town council, who has reviewed it and approved it. Okay, the last slide here is that let me see if we get this up here. There we go. Keeps. Yes.
Damn clickers.
What's that? Yeah, I want number 69. 69? Okay, that's it right there. Okay, what we did was we modified the maintenance repair contract to reflect the pump out procedures. We amended the FY16 sewer enterprise fund in the amount of $170,000. We've reviewed freeze prevention and pump out procedures with the grinder pump owners. And the town meeting warrant language will appropriate the funds from the sewer stabilization fund for maintenance and repair. This is the funding that will be required to complete the maintenance repair contract, which we currently have with Weston and Sampson through the end of this fiscal year. Next spring, we'll come back to you again with a new number for the maintenance and repair effort for the next fiscal year, and we're hoping that it will be significantly less than it was the first year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gilroy. Any questions for Mr. Gilroy and the committee? Ms. France?
Mary France, Precinct 6. I've been reading through this and trying to fully understand it. In this revised bylaw,
Yes, ma'am.
do the roles of the town and the residents change in any way, or are we basically dealing with the same thing that we were at in the spring? It's just defined them better
It's
in
just
the
defined-
language.
It wasn't defined in the bylaws. We're dealing with the same thing we did in the spring as far as the initial covenant that we have with the grinder pump owners is still stands. It hasn't been changed. It's just clarifying the roles of the grinder pump owners in the town. They haven't changed, no.
Okay. Also, the amendment to the sewer enterprise fund, you said that's coming out of the stabilization fund?
Sewer enterprise fund, I believe I said.
Sewer enterprise fund?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
So that affects the rates. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lowe?
Jerry Lowe, Precinct 7. No, 9, sorry about that. I didn't move yet. I'm on page 32 of the handout, and the language says, replaced, I'm on the second slide, and it says, replaced by the town of Chelmsford, and underline, this is new wording, at the election of the Department of Public Works. I want to understand what that means and how that's different from what was in there before.
Wasn't in there.
The language that was in there before is crossed out. The language that is new is the language that's underlined.
Right,
So-
but the meaning, to me, it looks like that the Department of Public Works can just decide that they don't want to repair or replace or maintain a grinder pump, and it doesn't give.
Well, there has to be an arbitrary point here. I mean, if there's a problem with the grinder pump, and if that grinder pump problem is the property, is the fault of the property owner, then the property owner is responsible. If it's not the fault of the property owner, then the town's responsible. It's that simple. But the town sewer department would be the best one to make that determination.
I don't see where that language explicitly clarifies that.
What would you suggest, sir?
I'm not suggesting
Well, I
anything.
mean, we spent long hours on this, and we had people come in and give their opinions. I didn't see you there. If you had a problem, you should have come in.
Let's refrain from debate. This is still question and answer. We can't debate from the podium, so.
I'm just trying to make it that it's clear
Well, I thought I
to the
clarified.
people who have grinder, I don't have a grinder pump,
Right.
but I want to make sure that we're being fair to the original intent.
Well, I think we're being.
And to me, the way I read this, does not say that. It just says that for any, that doesn't give specific reasons why they can refuse to do it.
Okay.
Well,
That's my question.
well,
If you
read-
want, town council said they could answer part of the question for Mr. Lowe.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, the way I interpret the change to the bylaw is the wording at the election of the DPW refers to whether the grinder pump will be repaired or replaced. So that's the discretion that the DPW has under this bylaw to determine whether the grinder pump can be repaired or whether it needs to be replaced.
At the election of the Department of Public Works.
Does that help you, Mr. Lowe?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the language is that clear, but if everyone else is okay with that, I would.
Understand if it's
Yep,
replaced,
well-
the town pays for the replacement. You understand?
No, yeah,
The town
okay.
will pay for the replacement.
Okay.
Ms. Carter?
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. Two questions. You talked about a revised scope with Weston and Sampson.
Yes.
Is that contract going out for bid again, where it's
No,
different than what was bid previously?
It's not going out to bid. This contract is not going out to bid, no.
Okay.
It's currently enforced. There's some additional items that we've discussed that we didn't even know about, such as a pump-out procedure, which is required after so many years. This will have to be done at a certain period of time. So that has to be added.
Is the contract amount going up, or is it staying the same?
Contract amount is going up in the amount of what we're asking for right now.
Okay, okay.
Will it go up next year to include that? It may. We'll have to see.
Okay, and the other question I have is, your slide said it was, a second, I need my glasses too. Review freeze prevention. If a sewer is put in properly, it generates its own heat, and it's 5 feet of cover, so it's below the frost line, so
Okay, well.
I didn't understand that
there
one.
There have been some occasions where some of these pumps have froze. There is a method to prevent this. It's a very small percentage, I might add, okay? It's less than 5%. But we did discuss it at some length, and there is a procedure which Dave Foley has put together and sent out to the grinder pump owners. If they feel that there's a problem, they can prevent it themselves, and it's very, very inexpensive.
So was there a problem with the initial installation and that they weren't installed per code? Is that the problem?
It's quite possible, yes.
Okay,
Quite
so
possible.
we're living with,
Well, like I say, it's a very small number.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify whether or not there was a problem with the initial installation or something new that's occurring.
No, this is something that the homeowner will take care of themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? There being none, at this time, I would ask for a recommendation from the Finance Committee.
The Finance Committee takes no action on this article.
Is there a recommendation from the Board of Select?
Board recommends favorable action.
Okay. At this time, I'd open the floor for debate if there is any. There being none, at this time, I would ask everybody, you just have to come up.
I think I can make a simple amendment to this to make it very clear, what I thought wasn't clear before, by sticking the word either in there. So that means they have to do one of the three, whereas without that word, it means that they can elect to do nothing. So I'm saying shall be either maintained, repaired, or replaced.
Okay. Well, if you wish to make an amendment, you're
I
going to
do.
have to come up, you're going to have to put it in writing, and then I have to have town council review it.
What do you think, guys? Nothing. You don't care.
Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. It looked for a moment as if the continuing saga of the grinder pump was going to proceed and evolve smoothly, but Jerry Lowe has offered an amendment on the wording. It is, to my eye, a little confusing. New wording has been added that gives the DPW the authority to either repair or replace a grinder pump if it is found to be defective, as opposed to some kind of damage caused by the homeowner, in which case the homeowner is responsible for it. His solution is to make it clearer that the DPW has to do one action or another, either to repair or replace if it's found, in addition to maintaining the grinder pumps. Those of you who've been with town meeting over the last year know that this has been a very, very hotly debated issue. I think the Grinder Pump Study Committee has been working diligently to try to reconcile what was arguably coming out of the gate with the inception of the sewer project some 20 years ago, one of the sort of untold stories, if you will, that some homeowners were required by virtue of the design of the system to have these grinder pumps. They're basically pumps that take their sewage and force it uphill in order for it to be joined into the rest of the system, because their properties are not sufficiently high up to feed their sewage into the system just by gravity alone. It turns out that you might recall that those grinder pumps have a much higher rate of failure. They don't last nearly as long as they were initially expected to. Part of it has to do with the quality of the pumps to begin with. Part of it has to do with the fact that some of the homeowners weren't perhaps maintaining them as carefully as they should have. But in any case, this came to a head about a year ago and led to the adoption by town meeting of a bylaw that requires the town to take over the maintenance of these pumps And so that has added to the sewer committee's, the sewer department's overhead, its budget, that they are now maintaining these pumps. There were, to my recollection, about 500 of these scattered throughout the town, 300 to 500. And so it is a fair number of them, though proportionate to the rest of the town, a relatively small percentage of homeowners. And also it's to be pointed out that this bylaw does not cover grinder pumps involved with commercial properties. Those remain the responsibility of the commercial property owners. Those of you who might just have tuned in, seeing Mike McCall at the moderator's podium, he is there because John Curlin, the moderator, has a grinder pump and recused himself, at least for the purpose of this particular article. We want to remind you all watching that if you are not able to read the slides as you see it projected on your television or whatever device you're using, that you can actually go to the Chelmsford Telemedia website to see them in high def, and they're quite readable. I've checked it out. That website is www.chelmsfordtv.org/watch/slides. We're making good progress here this evening.
I now have a motion to amend from Mr. Lowe. He's seeking to insert the word either after shall be and before maintained, repaired, or replaced. Mr. Lowe, do you care to explain to the body why you feel the amendment's necessary?
What I'm trying to do is make it clear that one of the actions has to be taken and not give the DPW the option of doing nothing, and that's what I feel that without the either in there, the language does. I do have some contention, not contention, but some explanation from the Finance Committee here where they partially agree, but that it's not an or for all three things, but there's two that are combined together and an or, but it still needs clarification. So should we, I don't know whether we should try to reword it again or.
Mr. Gilroy?
Well, I'm answering the question right now.
So, are you answering his question?
I'm answering his question. Okay, and the question he has is about the insertion of the word either. We discussed this at some length. And the reason we didn't put it in there is if you have either, that means you can maintain it, but you can't repair it. We thought that you can maintain it and you can repair it, or you're going to replace it. Now, this determination is not made by the DPW. This determination is made by Weston and Sampson, who's the contractor. They make the determination. They're the ones that are doing the job, not the DPW. And they're very qualified in that particular regard, and that's why we chose them as our contractor. So we didn't think it was necessary. You know, I respect Mr. Lowe's opinion, but I don't think that it adds anything to it. As a matter of fact, I think it's a deterrent.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lowe, before I open it up for general questions, anything else to add?
I still think we could fix the language, but I don't have a grinder pump. If there's anyone here with grinder pumps that think that this should be clarified, I would recommend that they come up and speak to it. Otherwise, I would be glad to drop it.
Questions for the proponent?
If he's willing to drop it, no.
I'm just, there's no grinder people that have an issue with this language then.
Well, we won't know until we vote.
Okay.
A recommendation from the Finance Committee at this point?
We took no action on this article.
Board of Selectmen?
The Board of Selectmen see no problem with it, but yeah, we're in favor of it.
Okay. Now, we're under the amendment at this point in time.
It's a resounding.
Okay, at this time, I'd open it up for debate on the amendment.
Okay, Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I'd just like to say that adding the word either actually makes it invalid English language because either can only be two options, and there are three options in this list, so the either doesn't make any sense, period.
May I?
Town council wants to point out something.
So if Google is an authoritative source, it either is used to identify two options or occasionally more than two options. Having said that, this is a good example of why trying to amend a bylaw on town meeting floor is fraught with peril, especially when you've had a committee that has spent such a long time trying to get it right. My concern with inserting the word either is that, and I believe the chairman of the committee alluded to this, it's possible that the DPW might choose a combination of maintaining, repairing, or replacing. And so I think, the word is unnecessary, and I also think it could potentially create an interpretation problem. So my recommendation from a legal standpoint would be to defeat the amendment.
Yes, sir.
David Foley, Precinct 5, and I own a grinder pump, and I'm a member of the grinder pump committee, and I'm the president of the homeowners association. And I'd just like to say that I really appreciate Jerry Lowe's motion because he is looking at the wording very carefully, and he is standing up for the grinder pump owner. But I would say in this case, the grinder pump owner has no problem with this wording. It's almost impossible, I think, to make something where the wording is, invulnerable to any other possible interpretation. And in this case, the grinder pump owners have faith in the town, and this type of wording, we would never think that this would ever be used in a way to withhold services to the pump. So I'd just like to say that we have no objection to the current wording, and an appreciation for Jerry Lowe.
Any other debate? There being none, at this time, we will now vote on the motion to amend. If you're in favor of the motion to amend, vote yes. If you're opposed, vote no. Simple majority.
So you just heard from David Foley, who's on this grinder pump study committee. I actually spent quite a bit of time with him. He lives in my neighborhood in South Chelmsford, and this was before the initial town meeting vote, and he really opened my eyes to a lot of the problems that were encountered. And I think he's and the grinder pump owners have really approached this with a degree of concern, of course, but also civility that you see borne out in his response to
there were 12 in favor, 123 opposed, 1 abstention. The motion to amend fails. We are now back still on debate of the main motion. Is there anybody else who wish to? Ms. France.
Mary France, Precinct 6. Just a curiosity, can I ask why the Finance Committee didn't take any action on this bylaw? I mean, it's certainly adoption of this bylaw has financial implications to sewer ratepayers.
The chairman of the Finance Committee wish to respond.
We chose to take no action. Because the language itself didn't have any financial implication. The part where we go to take it out of the sewer enterprise fund has the financial implication.
Any other debate under Article 7? There being none at this time, I would ask you to gather your clickers. We will vote on the motion. It's a simple majority. If you're in favor, number 1. If you're opposed, number 2. And this is to amend the sewer grinder pump bylaw.
We voted on the amendment, but this is another, we're amending the code from last year.
There's 124 in favor, 10 opposed, 1 abstention. The motion passes. Under Article 8, I have a motion to amend the sewer enterprise budget voted under Article 7 of the spring annual town meeting. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 8 is to address the financial implications of the town's responsibility for the maintenance of the sewer grinder pumps, and this is an article requesting an additional appropriation of $170,000 from sewer enterprise revenues.
Any questions? I see Mr. Foley coming.
David Foley, Precinct 5. I'd just like to ask some questions just to clarify the numbers regarding the budget for the grinder pumps. So my first question is, for the previous fiscal year, can you say what the total expenses were for the grinder pumps in its first year?
Yes, it's the same answer I gave you on last Wednesday evening when you asked this question.
I didn't ask this question on Wednesday.
Yeah, you asked me what the town expended last Wednesday evening on the maintenance of the grinder pumps, and I'll repeat the answer for everybody because some weren't in attendance. But the town expended $338,767 for grinder pump invoices in the last fiscal year, which was our first year of dealing with the grinder pumps. Of that amount, $140,600 were paid for the inspection program's cost, which left us with a balance of $198,167 for the repairs that were paid out of the budget in last year's fiscal year.
Oh, so 338 were the expenses in the first year?
338,767.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Good.
And now, my next question is the current budget for this year. What is the current budget for this year?
The current budget for this fiscal year is $280,000.
Okay. And therefore, this 170 would bring this year's budget to 450.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and my next question is, if not all of that money is spent in this year, would that money roll over to the following year? How is that done?
The sewer maintenance of our sewer system is done through an enterprise fund. What that means is it's a self-contained accounting and financial entity. So the expenses for the maintenance of our sewer system, including the grinder pumps, the pump stations, the employees, and so forth, are self-contained from the sewer revenues that you receive from your semi-annual sewer bills. They're accounted for separately. At the end of the fiscal year, any balances go to the sewer enterprise free cash, which means it stays within that fund, and then that then gets carried forward. Earlier this evening, I provided the information on the balance of that account under Article 1, the balance in the sewer enterprise fund. The only way those monies, like other free cash for the general fund, can get expended is it requires a town meeting appropriation.
So if there was a surplus at the end of this year, would that have to get reappropriated back into the grinder pump program, or would that be available for the grinder pump program without any additional vote?
Let's make this clear. We have one sewer enterprise budget for all sewer operations, from the pump stations to the employees to these grinder pumps and to other aspects of it. It's a self-contained entity. Any balance goes to the free cash of the enterprise fund. The sewer budget for the upcoming year is approved at the spring annual town meeting and or adjusted at fall annual town meeting, and as part of the budget voted by the town meeting. We presented that detailed budget back in April. There is no separate accounting for grinder pumps. It's all part of the sewer enterprise operations for an accounting purposes. Again, if it's not expended, it stays within that fund, becomes part of the free cash, and then has to be appropriated by town meeting for future expenses related to the maintenance of the town's sewer system, including grinder pumps.
Okay, and my last question. What is the proposed budget for the next fiscal year?
We do not have a proposed budget for any department of the town for the next fiscal year. Right now, we have budget requests out to all departments. Our budget period for all town operations begins October 1st. Departments are submitting their budgets by October 31st. I will be presented, in accordance with the town bylaws, a budget to the community at the end of January, which is 90 days before the spring annual town meeting, to the Finance Committee and to the Board of Selectmen. The Finance Committee will hold its hearings throughout the months of February, March, and will make its recommendations in April, at which time the Board of Selectmen will make its recommendations. And at the April town meeting, you will have the proposed budget for consideration for fiscal year 17, which begins July 1st, 2016.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up on that. At the Springtown meeting, there was a 4-year grinder pump program presented by the town, which had projected costs for next year, that is FY17 and FY18. So what I'm asking you is, are those numbers still in force, or can you comment on that, whether those are still applicable?
Earlier this evening, we heard a 5-year financial forecast from our town finance director. The word is forecast. We treat each budget as it comes up with the best information we know at the time of the town meeting. We have not altered the forecast for the sewer grinder pumps or the other sewer operations beyond what we presented to you in April. As I said, those considerations will take place over the next few months. We will come to you in April with the best information we have in terms of the upcoming year and be able to answer any questions of what our best forecasts are for the subsequent fiscal years.
Thank you.
Ms. Carter.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. To put this in perspective, how much does this relate to the average household for increase in sewer rates?
It's a couple percent. You're going to have a couple percent increase as a result of this appropriation to meet grinder pumps. Now, the good news is, based on the forecast and information that we have, this will be the end of it in terms of there should not be any further spikes or increases based upon what we know. At this point in time, the town has completed with Weston and Sampson all the inspections of all the sewer grinder pumps in the community. We know what we have out there now. We also have a year's worth of experience under our belt in terms of what it costs us to maintain and monitor these systems. So at this point, we don't foresee anything beyond what we have right now.
So is this additional expense basically to bring the remainder of the grinder pumps up to snuff? So projecting forward, it'll be more of a maintenance than a replacement and repair?
Yes, it's basically meant to allow us to what we believe is the annual recurring costs to maintain and care for grinder pumps, and so that we're not running a deficit. And that was the issue, is we can only go upon the experience that we have. We really will need a few years' experience to be fully confident, but recognizing the fact that each year the grinder pumps that are in place for they're aging. So best we know, this should do it.
So realistically, next year, we could potentially see the amount going down because the grinder pumps have been brought up to speed and have had regular maintenance, that we may see this number go down?
Right. What will happen is you'll just have fluctuations because of the random nature of repairs.
Okay.
But again, in terms of a steady state, we don't foresee there'll be large fluctuations. It may go down one year, go up per year. And again, as was explained earlier, if there's monies left over, it will stay within the sewer enterprise fund in its free cash form and to adjust any irregularities.
Okay, thank you.
There being no further questions, I would ask the Finance Committee for a recommendation.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee recommended approval of this article.
Board of Selectmen?
Selectmen recommend favorable action.
At this point, we'd be in debate. Is there anybody who wishes to come forward? There being none at this time, I would ask you to vote on Article 8. If you're in favor of Article 8, please select number 1. If you're opposed, number 2. I believe this is 2/3, correct? Nope, it's majority.
Yeah, we don't get it up here. It's a majority vote.
Yep. It's the money, I think. I have 118 in favor, 16 opposed, and 1 abstention. The motion passes.
I'd like to thank Mike McCall for doing an outstanding job on those warrant articles. Okay, Article 9, Mr. Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 9 is really a action that we're looking forward to in terms of the financial planning for the community. We're seeking $15,000 from free cash to conduct an appraisal and structural analysis of the Chelmsford Forum. Many of you may be aware in terms of the Chelmsford Forum out off 129 by the Route 3 interchange. Back in, it would be 17 years ago, the legislature adopted Chapter 141 of the Acts of 1998 that authorized a lease from the Commonwealth for 20 years of the Forum to the town of Chelmsford. This basically became when the Songus Arena opened in Lowell, and UMass Lowell then had a new facility. And however, this 20-year period expires in 2018, which is just a couple years away. In that legislation, the town has the option to purchase the property. And the legislation states that the purchase price shall be the full and fair market value of the property as determined by an independent appraisal for its use, less the cost of all improvements, alterations, and renovations made by the town. To give you a sense on what's out there for those of you who haven't been to the Forum lately, the Forum facility was built in 1964. It's about a 39,000 square feet ice hockey rink. In terms of the composition of it, it straddles the town line. 8 acres of the Forum is located in Chelmsford. That portion is basically the land behind the building next to Route 3 and sort of the area where the buses are parked. The assessed value for that land is $260,200. The remainder of the parcel, meaning the Forum building itself, as well as the parking lot and the land that abuts Brick Hill Road and 129, is 7.1 acres. As I said, it's located in the town of Barica. It's assessed for $1,989,700, of which the land is assessed for $765,000. The building is assessed at $1.17 million, and then there's some property in the building assessed for $54,000. Under the legislation, we make an annual payment of $10,000 in lieu of taxes to the town of Barica. So what we're seeking to do here is basically do some financial planning because we're nearing the end of this lease period and we have a choice to make. We can either do nothing and let the lease expire, it goes back to the Commonwealth, and the town of Chelmsford has no interest and no control of the facility other than the portion of land that's in Chelmsford but owned by the Commonwealth. And then we would have, as a community, the challenge financially and otherwise to provide facilities for our ice hockey team at the high school as well as other users in the community. The other option is to exercise our option under the legislation to purchase the facility, but again, for a building that was built over 50 years ago, in order to do that due diligence, we really need to go out there, have a professional structural engineer look at the facility and make sure that we can make a sound investment and know what needs to be done going into the facility. We have made improvements to the facility over the years. In the last 10 years, we've improved the ice surface, we replaced the boards, we replaced the scoreboard, we replaced the roof. Town meeting has also voted to resurface portions of the parking area and so forth. So we have been maintaining the facility through the capital funds. This facility does not incur any tax liability for the community. The revenues from the third-party management company that operates the Forum pays for the operations of the facility as well as the capital improvements. So what we need to do is decide whether we want to make that decision of acquisition or do nothing, or perhaps seek further legislation of a continued lease from the legislature. But again, in order to do that, we need to get our facts and information. What we'd like to do is do this in a timely manner. At this point, we would seek your funding. If the funding is approved this evening, we would come back at the spring town meeting in April, provide a report to you on the appraisal and structural analysis results, probably come back a year from now and seek an authorization on which direction to go forward. Based upon that action, we would then meet with various state officials from Department of Capital Asset Management to the Inspector General and so forth, if that's to take place, so that it can be done in a timely manner prior to the expiration of this in June of 2018. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Now is the opportunity for questions and answers.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. The purchase price on the agreement says less the cost of all improvements, alterations, and renovations made by the town. Do we have any idea or estimate of what that is that would offset, say the cost, say the fair market value is $1 million? Have we paid into $300,000 already?
Oh, we've expended $750,000 thus far in various improvements to the facility, both some of which came through town meeting in terms of the roof, the scoreboard, the parking lot and so forth. Others have been part of the lease agreement with the private vendor, with the ice surface and so forth. So we do have that data. It's all compiled in our accounting office and maintained records also in our public works. So what we need to do is find out what the value is of the facility, then compare that to what we've invested, get a net cost, and develop a financial plan if we wish to purchase it.
So I mean, we do have a substantial already reduction.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. Does the town realize revenues from the forum, from outside?
No, as I explained earlier, the Chelmsford Forum revenues under the legislation are self-contained within the forum. So we do not receive any tax revenues, nor do we receive any revenues to the town's general fund. All the revenues from the lease and operations of the forum stay with the forum and provide there. Quite frankly, as I said earlier, the only tax revenue the town would have for that facility if it went into private use would be quite limited, because all we have is that 8 acres, which are not the building nor the land along the roadways, and again, our assessors value that at $260,000. So if this were to go back under the private tax rolls at that rate, you can imagine that the amount of revenue the town would receive would be minimal. It would be less than a typical single-family home.
So the town doesn't rent it out?
No, we have a private management company
that does
that activity, very similar to the golf course.
Okay.
Same thing. The golf course is the same thing. We have a management company that's responsible for the maintenance and lease of the activities there.
Got it.
Any more questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends this article.
Do the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Selectmen recommend favorable action.
Now is the opportunity for discussion on the warrant article. There being none, an affirmative vote will be to authorize $15,000 from free cash for a appraisal and structural analysis of the Chelmsford Forum. Final vote is 135 in favor, 5 opposed, no abstention. The article passes. Article 10, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Continuing along with the theme of doing some financial planning for the long-term capital needs of the community, Article 10 is a request to transfer $200,000 from free cash to conduct a comprehensive facilities assessment for the Chelmsford Public Schools. The genesis of this article comes from our new superintendent, Dr. Jay Lang. He has conducted a similar appraisal at his previous employment in the city of Lowell in terms of their facilities. In terms of Chelmsford needs, it's been well over a decade since the community has done a comprehensive analysis of the facilities of our school children. You may recall back before in the early 2000s, the town did an assessment of the school facilities, brought before town meeting a series of requests for funding for various capital projects. The town eventually settled upon a $33 million capital project that resulted in the Performing Arts Center, repairs to the science labs and so forth at the high school, the middle school, libraries, and so forth. Well, now we're a decade further in history, and it's time, in order to do the financial planning for the community, to look at what needs to be done, recognizing the investments that the town has taken upon during the last decade, such as the energy investments, the facilities, the air handling, and so forth. As Dr. Lane can best describe, what this involves is not just looking at the infrastructure, it also has to do with the educational operations of the schools, in terms of the challenges that are met going forward, in terms of how classroom space is needed, the question of space for full-day kindergarten, the question of what do we do with our modular buildings, the classrooms, many of which are at the end of, nearing the end of their useful life. And so in order to sort of determine, with input from the community over a 6-month period, which has already received the endorsement of the school committee in terms of issuing an RFP and bringing in people and experts to examine the facilities over the next 6 to 8 months to determine what needs to take place educationally, how that works structurally, and again, it goes to the whole questions of preparing 21st century facilities for the children of Chelmsford. No one is contemplating a new school, entire school construction like you're seeing in Billerica or seeing in Lowell or have seen in Tewksbury or Draycott and so forth. What's looking at is how do we best configure and maintain our facilities going forward, and some of that investment may involve, in fact, using a state reimbursed project through the School Assistance Bureau in order to best meet the funding needs, where the state would actually pay 50% of such a cost like they did back in a decade ago. So this is basically a time to take a comprehensive examination. We have a superintendent who has experience with doing this very thing and will help us to do a 10-year plan going forward. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. This is an opportunity for you to ask questions of the proponent. There appears to be one. Or more.
Mr. Moderator, Doug Bruce, Precinct 9, to you, to the town manager through you. Would there be any benefit to expanding the scope of this to include all town facilities outside of just the school department, so that planning throughout the town for facilities could be looked at with a more critical eye?
I don't think it's necessary, and let me explain why. We, in the last decade, have made substantial investments in the town side. We've completed the improvements at the Adams Library. We've addressed the fire station needs most recently. The police station is but a decade old. The one that's still out there is the remainder work that takes place at the DPW facility on Alpha Road. But we already have those cost estimates. You've seen them repeatedly presented by Pat Maloney when he was up here giving the reports of the Permanent Building Committee. So, and the town offices is in sound shape. We just have one small section of the building by the gymnasium that we'll probably bring in forth in this year's capital plan to complete in terms of the weatherization and windows and so forth. So the good news is we're pretty much addressed on the town side, and what we really need to do now is pivot back into the school facilities. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Hi, Karen Kowalski, Precinct 1. Is there an urgency to have this done this year, or is this something that can wait till next?
I believe, but I'd like Dr. Lane to speak to really the need for planning right now, because we are sort of at a critical stage, particularly with the age of some of our modular buildings. But
I'm just going to sit down.
Okay.
I'll try to hit on your question. I think one of the things that's very important is, as you get into a cycle and you start looking at projects like this will take 6 to 8 months to actually come to fruition. And we're trying to, as we're looking at, say, the fiscal 17 capital funding from the town, when we're trying to look at potential state funding or reimbursement through the Mass School Building Authority for different programs, you really need to get in the queue, particularly if you're looking for state level funding, to be considered to receive it. So I do think it's something that's important to do now, because if we actually do award a contract and work with a firm over the next 6 to 8 months. By late spring, early summer, we would actually have a plan and know where we're going for fiscal 17, as opposed to pushing that cycle off for a whole year. The way the MSBA funding cycle works, excuse me, their funding cycle comes forward in March or April of every spring. So this actually will take 6 or 8 months to complete. The work would be very open to the community, both in the schools. We would want individuals from the town to be involved, and to actually have there be agreement around this particular study and taking a look at the schools and where we want to see the schools go over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Timeline-wise, if we receive the report at the end of the spring, early summer, had some discussion, and we're able to better inform the fiscal 17-18 town capital budgets, and then also have the our applications ready for possible consideration for the MSBA in the March-April window of 17, that would be much better off than waiting a whole year until 18. The cost really isn't going to change whether we do it now or we do it a year from now, but you are delaying a good year of review and investment in the school buildings, if you don't act now.
Thank you, Doctor. Any more questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Yes, the Finance Committee recommends approval of this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action.
Thank you. At this point, opportunity for discussion.
Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. What I'm concerned about here is, first of all, let me ask a question, and that is, $200,000, is that subject to a bid?
Yes, it would actually be a negotiated fee. It would be advertised as a designer services contract. So it's similar to an RFP where we'll go out to bid. Firms will submit proposals, but then we'll actually negotiate on a dollar amount for the contract. The $200,000 would be a not to exceed number.
Okay, but why would we tip them off that we'll spend up to $200,000? Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we leave it open and see what they come in with?
Because the firms actually are not submitting, like a typical bid, they're not submitting a price proposal. You have to specify the dollar amount that you're looking to spend on the study. I have looked at similar communities who have done comprehensive facilities assessments recently. That's the dollar amount that would be coming in. Looking at all of our 8 buildings, we're going to take into consideration also central office, the Mill Road property. About $200,000 is about the dollar amount that would come into play. And again, the firm isn't actually submitting a bid. They are going to have to negotiate that fee with us.
So we'll have multiple bids from multiple people?
Oh yes, I envision that. We did receive authorization to issue the request for proposals. That went out. We had a non-mandatory meeting last either Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. 6 different firms came to the briefing for the proposal. I anticipate anywhere between probably 4 and 6 firms will actually submit proposals. Those proposals will be reviewed. The individual firms will be invited in for interviews, and ultimately a recommendation to award a contract to one of the firms will come forward.
What I don't want to see is a shopping list. 10 years ago, when we had the 130 million or 113 million, whatever it was, there was a huge shopping list of what they wanted to do, and then we eventually got that whittled down to the libraries and the auditorium. But I don't want it to be an opportunity to just make a list, and our enrollment is dropping, so I certainly don't think that I would see a building of a new building, but that's the concern I have for that type of thing.
I appreciate your concern, and I can tell you from experience when I've worked on similar projects in the past, it doesn't actually start as a shopping list. The community will actually focus a lot of the work in the study. There'll be many input periods for town residents to come forward, for parents, for student involvement. And it actually is an exercise that allows the community to develop vision for where they want the schools to go over the next, again, 5, 10, 20 years. And then you actually try to map that vision to your existing facilities, and you identify any deficiencies that might be there. Some might be physical, some might be programmatic, and you actually then go through an exercise of developing different options, or we call them master plan options, where I was before this, and you actually kind of walk the community through trying to get some acceptance and agreement around the principles that are going to guide the study. But it certainly doesn't start out as a laundry list. The recommendations and the various options will come as the program flows out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any more discussion on this warrant article? There being none, we will vote on the article. This will be to authorize $200,000 from free cash for a facilities assessment of the Chelmsford Public Schools. A yes would be to authorize the funding.
This is Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. It's again sort of looking back in history, as Bob Joyce alluded, there was a time when, roughly a decade ago, when the town came forward with a very high price.
24 in favor, 11 opposed, 1 abstention. The article passes.
More than $100
Mr.
million
Manager, Article 11, please.
Proposed funding, and it was contentious for
Thank you,
quite a
Mr.
few years.
Moderator. Article 11
now we're proceeding much more
is
smoothly toward the next phase
request
of
to
that.
begin the implementation of the Center Village Master Plan. What's being requested this evening is a transfer of $10,000 from free cash to prepare design and bid specifications for a wayfinding signage in the town center. And I'd like to turn this presentation over to Evan Belansky, our Community Development Director, who obviously is most familiar with the Center Village Master Plan and has really brought forth this initiative for the community.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good evening. So Article 11 is a recommendation of the 2013 Center Village Master Plan. This committee was chaired by Jim Lane for well over a year. It was a citizens committee made up of business owners, property owners, citizens, town meeting members, planning board member, historic district commission member. So the plan recommended a multi-year implementation as it pertains to signage, as well as many other of the physical improvements. As it pertains to signage, the plan had a total estimated cost of between $150,000 and $250,000. This particular request in front of you this evening is requesting $10,000 for purposes of contracting for design and bid specifications with a consultant. That consultant would work with a committee again. The committee would be made up very similar to the original committee. Clearly, we would need property owners, business owners, members from the Historic District Commission, likely someone from the Sign Advisory Committee, and likely people from some of the cultural and civic facilities in the center. Once completed, in order to commence with any fabrication installation, future requests for funding would be needed by town meeting. So the next slide is taken directly from that 2013 Center Village Master Plan. Essentially what wayfinding signage is signage that is strategically designed and located to provide information to motorists, pedestrians, and in our case, bicyclists as well, to destinations such as parking, bike trail access, historic resources, public facilities, shopping areas, things of that nature. So the 2013 plan identified approximately 20 different signs at different locations. Those locations are identified on the slide that you see here. The next and final slide for this presentation also comes directly from the 2013 plan. This identifies conceptual prototype signage that could be chosen for the center village. As you can see, there's some signs that are geared towards motorists. They're larger in size.
There's also signs that are for pedestrian information. And then on the bottom left, there are more ornamental type signage. There's a variety of different options that are available. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Now's the opportunity for to question the proponent.
Chelmsford, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, through to the Speaker. You mentioned different organizations you were going to get involved. I would hope you'd have the Commission on Disabilities involved in that also to make sure that they are in compliance with the Commonwealth of Mass Regs 521.
That's an excellent suggestion, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. You said 20 signs?
Correct. The previous slide
Okay.
shows 20.
So $150,000 divided by 20 is $7,500 a sign?
Correct.
I'll get a router and start making some for you if
Yeah.
you want.
These aren't typical highway signs. They are typically of a higher quality material. Sometimes they're modular in nature so that they can be changed over time. They're fairly ornamental in nature. Certainly they can be simple, but size and material alone with fabrication installation, you'd be looking at probably $5,000 per sign.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. Evan, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing like 6 or 7 parking signs. Aren't they something that our highway department would deal with as opposed to the Center Village plan?
It's certainly an option. I think the concept of the Center Village wayfinding program, which is similar to what other towns embark on, is that there's a uniformity with the signage, that it all blends. The plan talks about the notion of expanding the geographic area of what is traditionally known as the center, to go down Summer Street, to go up to Fletcher Street, to go out towards 495. So I think the concept is that the signs are not necessarily highway signs or typical DPW signs, that they're more historic in nature and have a higher quality.
This says that it's a multi-year implementation. Can you speak to, over the course of how many years do we expect to see costs for these signs?
Well, I think the $10,000 process is probably a minimum 6-month process. That process with the consultant would work with the committee to determine what type of phasing makes sense. So there's signs that are more critical than other signs. Parking may be an example of those, where people can find public parking. So the phasing is yet to be determined. It is a large number, and the committee will have to figure that out as to what makes most sense, working with town and civic as well as private property owners and businesses, and then make a proposal to this body.
Thank you.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7, with apologies if I missed this, but do we know if the design process goes through and they come up with an estimate of $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 for what you want to put in, what the funding sources will be for that eventually, and when?
Well, unfortunately, there's little or no typical state grant money for this type of physical improvement to a town center. In addition, it's also not applicable for CPC funding. That was the first option where we looked at to see if this request would be applicable.
Even for the historical signs, or?
Does not appear to be
Okay.
applicable.
All right, thank you.
And I'm sorry, what was your?
So that leaves either the capital budget or the operating budget. Is there an expectation that the administration has on?
Well, the first option, which is still in play, is the $5 million earmark in the transportation bond bill. That's still sitting, waiting for the governor's sign-off to authorize that money to be allocated to the town. This is for lack of a better word, low-hanging fruit that the town can take in an immediate action to begin implementation. But as far as whether it comes from free cash or some sort of appropriation, I think that's yet to be determined.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Lane, Precinct 7, Mr. Moderator, through you to the Speaker. Evan, can you just explain to me, how would this be, this historical signage or open space signage or recreational signage, how would that be any different than what we've done on open spaces today for signage? That was funded through CPC.
Yeah, so some of the signage we may be able to fit into open space and recreation. Clearly, if we had the brick walk, which is the centerpiece of a vast majority of the improvement program, a brick walk by definition is a linear park or parkway. So I agree with you that many of the signs initially tied to the brick walk would clearly fit into recreation and open space under CPC. Without that brick walk in place, many of the signs, if we choose to move forward with those signs, don't fall very nicely and neatly into a CPC category.
Okay, just from my own understanding though, that the wayfind signage that you're proposing as part of this study would be everything that we covered in the master plan, which the brook walk was part of that?
Correct, correct, right. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Tuberty, Precinct 1. When you're talking $10,000, you're saying I want to tell these folks that I'm going to spend up to $200,000 for signs. Is there a way to maybe rein that back and say, not to, I want signs, but not to exceed a certain dollar amount? Because I agree with you previously.
Sure, no, I understand what you're saying. So what will happen is within the committee process, working with the consultant, the starting point will be this graphic. So this graphic represents what the committee felt was a conceptual prototype as far as location and number. But they didn't go into a specific level of detail. They didn't go out and figure out what's the sign going to say, how large does it need to be. They also didn't go into detail about the size, the material, how much do they really want to spend. That's the point of the $10,000 consultant process, working with the town committee, is to further define and focus in on what truly are the needs as opposed to the wish list.
Okay, and given that you have, it appears, a lot of parking signs, they would be standardized, I would assume. Is that
correct? All parking signs would look very similar.
So there's not a whole lot of different types of signs, because the parking signs are most of the signs, it seems?
Agreed. The signs don't have to be very intricate. As you can see on the bottom left corner, a parking sign can be as simple as what you would normally see for a DPW sign. It would just be slightly more aesthetically pleasing.
So how do we help influence what you put out in your original bid to go get your designs? Because if they hear that you're going to spend $200,000, they're going to jump all over. And I can spend $200,000 for you beautifully.
So
that's not what I want.
The consultant, the design consultant, is not going to be a party to the $200,000 fabrication installation. They will not be party to that. It's the sign consultant is simply a sign consultant. Will they be able to provide a list of fabricators and installers? Absolutely. That cost or that project would also have to go out to a public bid.
Are we in discussion or just questions?
Questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Sue Dandera, Precinct 9. Do we have a previous example of a sign that's in the Center Historic District and how that was funded and maybe a cost for that?
I'm not sure. Yeah, well, we have examples of existing decorative lights that were installed as part of the Mass Highway Transportation Improvement Project for the center. that's not necessarily signage. I'm not aware of any customized sign that's been installed other than maybe there's one for the bike trail. I'm not even sure there's one for the bike trail there.
So there's no signage in the historic district that we could kind of benchmark of what we've done in the past?
Not that I'm aware of, no. There's a small entering historic district sign, very small, probably maybe 1 by 1.
Okay.
But there's no, monument sign or pedestal sign that you see in these diagrams.
So the 5,000, 5 to 7,500 figure we're estimating at this point, is that the same for replacement cost, or does that include the design and original design of those signs? Or
Yeah, that did not include replacement costs. Again, there's a variety of ways to accomplish whatever the goal may be. I envision these to be modular in nature, where as destinations come and go or things need to be added, you're able to slide them in, very similar to the directory sign at Town Hall, where they have the ability to slide things in and out. But there's a variety of options. As I mentioned, there's a variety of materials. The CPC signs that you've heard talked about are a high quality PVC. Some of them are wood and some of them are granite. Clearly what we're talking about here is probably something a little higher quality than a PVC product.
I think, like the previous speaker, if there's some way to better define and limit the design and bid scope of work, I think that would be something that we're interested in doing.
Sure, that makes sense. And I think what we may be able to do moving forward is, if the article passes prior to the establishment of a committee, to have a draft mission statement prepared for that committee that can then be reviewed and approved by the appointing authority.
Thank you.
Andy Sillings, Precinct 7. I can't quite see all the signs on that other slide, so I'll ask you, there are 2 scenic roads in that area, in that center area. Are they part of the planning for the signage?
They can be. I mean, that's an option. It's not very traditional, but it certainly can be. I think some of the more obvious destinations are the Forefather Cemetery, the Toll House, the CCA, the library, the open spaces, Bartlett Park, things of that nature.
So these signs are signs saying, if you want this, go over there, or go over there, as opposed to, here it is, here I am.
Correct. I mean, once you're in the center, as you'll see, there would be one that has a map. The challenge, to put this into context, is you have a variety of existing resources in the center, and fairly new ones, one being the CCA. The CCA is an example, as well as the library, where they're bringing customers from out of town, as well as residents who live in town but aren't necessarily very familiar with where to park in the center. So if you've ever heard Susan Gates, the the director of the CCA, she'll repeatedly indicate that people finding the parking is a challenge. The parking itself is not the challenge, but directing people to find the parking is a challenge. There were members on the committee, as well as the public process, many people in town, some were town meeting members, who didn't know that there was public parking behind the former Sovereign Bank, which is now Santander Bank. So those are baseline challenges. Then you introduce the bike path, where again, we're inviting people from out of town to come visit the town. The concept is not just to have them park and hop on the bike trail, but there's other things to do in the town center. There's recreation, there's culture, and there's open space, and there's shopping. So the signage is an attempt to educate and inform residents as well as visitors.
So that if at some future date the town decides to label the scenic roads, some are in that section and some are way on the outskirts, it wouldn't interfere with the signage that you're talking about.
Correct, it could be incorporated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for the proponent? There being none, does the finance, or is there? None? Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends approval of this article.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action.
Now's the time for discussion.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I'd like to agree with several of the previous speakers that $200,000 makes me a little nervous and is high. But having said that, many of you who were born and raised in Chelmsford and even in Massachusetts may not be aware of this, but Massachusetts is lacking signs. That is probably the nicest way I can say it. The running joke, being somebody who only moved here 10 years ago, that my husband and I have when we drive around is, well, do you know where we are? No, I don't know where we are. You know, fortunately, one of us can be looking at our phones while the other one's driving, which if you're alone, you can't do or shouldn't do. But the big joke we have is, well, of course they wouldn't put up a sign. You should know where you are. It is a great idea to actually let people know what's available and where they are and make them feel welcome and encouraged to be there and to stay there and to use things in the town. And so for that reason, I think this is an excellent idea, although, as I said, $200,000 might be pushing it when it comes to the signs, but we'll get to discuss that later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. One thing you didn't mention was, has the historical people looked at these signs and do they like them?
Well, there's no, they were involved with the Center Village Master Plan, and then that committee presented to Historic District Commission. But there's no specific proposal. As I indicated, clearly we would need Historic District Commission as part of the committee, and then ultimately we would need their approval.
Okay. I think that we're putting the horse, the cart before the horse. The reason I think that is because we don't know when the state is going to approve this money. And I think the more important thing to do right now is to reach out to the governor. So if all the Republicans in the House here can write a letter to the governor, we might be able to get our $5 million. But I'm opposed to putting up signs 5, 6, 7 years in advance of having something down there. And there's not going to be a lot, there's very few businesses down there. There's not a lot of businesses. I mean, we're starting to build up more businesses, which is good. And as far as parking goes, you know, every other city seems to get along with the big blue P, and maybe it should be bigger. Regarding the previous speaker saying that we don't have enough signs, all you have to do is go to the Santander Bank, that corner right there. I was on the planning board at the time that we approved it. It has signs that are out of control. I mean, it's just drive down there and see all the signs we get there. So I'm opposed to doing this at this time, and I think what we should do is follow up on getting the governor to sign. The money's appropriated. It's just that the governor has to approve it to get it to us. And I would much rather fight that fight than to fight this fight of putting up signs that aren't going to go with the center for 6 or 7 more years. So I recommend that you turn this down. And the final thought I have is that we have a certified engineer within our engineering department, and there's no reason why they couldn't come up with proposals based on these drawings and based on maybe going to Concord or Lexington and look at what kind of signage they have and come up with proposals that way. In the end, I would like to see a public-private agreement with the vendors in the center through CBA or through another method where the businesses would contribute partially to what happens down there. I mean, we're really a long way from this because in order to get the Riverwalk, we have to knock down that building that's in the way. And we can't do that until we get money, and we can't do that until the people on the West Coast that own that property will talk to us, because there's not an awful lot of communication going on between the owners of that Oddfellows building and the town, because they're difficult. We're trying our best. I know Paul's trying his best to do something with that. But there's no sense in putting new signs into an old place. Just upgrade them so that they're enough to get people from one point to another. And lastly, everybody uses Google on their phones anyway, so if you put in the CCA, no, but they pull over and park in a parking space. And the CCA is a very good example. If you put that in on your GPS, it's going to come up.
Thank you.
Kathy Tuberty, Precinct 1. I think planning is a very good idea. I think it's a great idea to kind of know where you want to go. Strategic plans are really important. One of the things that we were here kibitzing on, I'm sorry, because we were talking in line, was that maybe rather than spending $10,000, if you and maybe the civil engineering folks could combine together and create a standards. You'd tell us what the rules are and do a town-wide competition. You've got some incredibly talented students. You've got artists in town. There's a lot of graphic artists in town. Neshopa's got a graphics art program. There's a lot of different options out there. $10,000 is not a lot of money, given that we just approved $200,000, which is a huge amount of money. And the $10,000 doesn't bother me nearly as much as the possibility of spending $250,000. So that was one thought. Maybe you would like to consider, rather than putting it out to bid, is open it up to the community and let somebody design it. How cool it would be to say, so-and-so designed the sign and somebody else designed this sign, if you defined your standards ahead of time. But what I was originally going to say was that if you end up getting this $10,000 and you do release a request for proposal for bids, that you probably want to consider maybe giving them ranges of costs, because at $250,000, 20 signs, a lot of money.
That's right.
Even at $150,000, still a lot of money for signs. So maybe I'm not saying to incentivize, but like have them come back with multiple options. A good enough, an A plus, something. Because if I just give you $10,000 and you come and design signs, and you tell me I can spend $250,000.
That would be the role of the committee.
Okay.
To provide leadership and guidance to the consultants.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. With regards to something said by one of the previous speakers, I'd just like to point out to everyone that this request is for the bid and design analysis, not to actually take the money and build the signs yet. As was said previously, I think that if you get the money, that putting together the analysis and putting together an idea that could be then presented to the town for cheaper options, whether it be through the community, through other services, would be a great idea. But I think that the $10,000 is probably money well spent in analyzing what we need, what we can get for our money, and how it could be presented with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, we have to be nice to the town.
Ann McGuigan, Precinct 1. Number one, I would agree with spending $10,000 for this sign survey and just some design ideas, etc. But what I really wanted to approach was the comment regarding approaching the governor's office. As Mr. Joyce well knows, I sat with Representative Arcerio and Golden a week ago Friday And it was decided at that meeting that they would provide me with letters, and I was to obtain letters throughout this community with people that had access to the State House and other board members and residents interested in the Brook Walk in support of that project. And you well know I worked on that project for 2 years, and I would like to see it built. I think it's rather, well, bottom line is, as a project I am currently working on, Mr. Joyce is aware of that, so we are moving forward to that end, and we will accomplish that task and get that information on the governor's desk and on the lieutenant governor's desk, and hopefully we'll be able to get those funds released. In the interim, it makes good sense for us to be moving forward, assuming that we are ultimately going to be able to build this, because it will be the best thing that could ever happen to the center of Chelmsford. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. First, I'd like to thank the previous speaker for her efforts on this project. $10,000, as I understand, for this proposal will go to a consultant who has the expertise in guidance, wayfinding, and signage, and has the ability both to manage a citizens committee, to evaluate options, and select appropriate signage for the town center, and also to do the drawings and the specifications for that signage to send it out to bid. Is that true, Evan?
That's correct.
From the committees that I've been on in the past, the consultants that have helped us through our evaluations, through our research, and have pulled together the documentation that summarized all of our research and findings have been absolutely invaluable. And I believe that this $10,000 would be very well spent. $250,000 when you come back, that's another thing, but that's for another day. Right now, we need to decide what the plan should be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beth Logan, still in Precinct 3. So discussing the ability to find parking downtown first. Okay, 10 years, so maybe those who've been here longer than me, could you tell me where in the center of town you could actually ever pull over safely to look at your phone? I'd love to know that, because I'm not sure I know where that is,
Okay,
other than a parking lot.
let's stay focused on the issue.
So since you can't pull over, the signs would be helpful, but God forbid you are lucky enough to find a place to pull over. I have checked Google, and I did it 2 different ways. The parking spots that I can find are at Cranberry Bog, and there's an electric one up in Vinyl Square, and that is all that shows up in the 2 different ways I've done it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Graves, Precinct 9. As a frequent biker on the bike path, I just want to say the number of times that I get to the center of town and somebody will invariably ask me, so do you know where there's a bathroom? Do you know where there's a coffee shop? Do you know where there's a place to get a sandwich? That's, well, maybe not the bathrooms, but that's money spent in town, and I can only see that signs would just increase the money spent in town.
Thank you.
Bob Joyce, 103 Turnpike, Precinct 1. In reference to the previous speaker that said we were at a meeting together, that is true. And I know that the bottom line was that she was going to write some letters on behalf of the committee and see if we can get the governor to move on it. But my impression of the 4, actually there were 2 or 3, there were 2 there, was that, hey, the governor's a Republican and we're Democrats.
Mr. Joyce, with all due respect, We're not here to talk about the $5 million. We're here to talk about 10,000 for signage.
Right,
So
right.
I let you go on the first time around, but please, let's stay focused.
Well, it is related, and the point is that we have to get more people to go after the governor to release it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? There being none, we will be voting on Article 11. An affirmative vote would be to appropriate $10,000 to prepare design and bid specifications for wayfinding signage.
John just made me.
This is Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. I am watching the votes come in. It looks like this is going to pass. If you had asked me before the beginning of the meeting which article would most likely take 45 minutes to debate and vote on, this would not have been one of them. I would have seen this as being up and down in less than 5 minutes. But apparently people have, because perhaps it's close to home,
Final
they
vote,
have their own
88
ideas.
in favor, 43 opposed, 2 abstention. The articles pass.
They have a lot of opinions on how signs
Article
ought to be
12,
handled
Mr.
in
Manager.
town.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The next article, again, in the planning and diligence theme, pertains to the 101 Mill Road property that town meeting authorized and the town acquired just under a year ago. This is a request for $7,000 from free cash to conduct a structural analysis and building code analysis of that property. And I'm going to turn the presentation over to Bill Griffin, who'll be presenting information for your consideration this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to bring this before you this evening. Speaking on behalf of the 101 Mill Committee, again, as the town manager reiterated, the property was purchased last year at the special town meeting for the price of $490,000, and a committee was formed in order to evaluate the site and determine best possible future use for the town. During the process of our efforts to date, the committee has come up with this request in order to complete its mission to give the town a best possible recommendation forward. So we are requesting the sum of $7,000 in order to pursue both a structural and ADA evaluation of the existing structure. In terms of progress to date, the committee was formed at the beginning of the year and has been meeting on a bi-weekly basis throughout. We've had an open house at the site, and we've had a number of other opportunities for public input during our sessions. We've also attended the farmers market towards the end of summer, where we received some additional great feedback from other members of the public. To date, we've been evaluating several use models for the property, and they revolve around the ones that you see here. Back one here. We have a single tenant use, and that's been supported by 2 visits from the school committee, one in the spring, and then one most recently with Dr. Lang. This is because the site was the former Middlesex Education Collaborative Building. It does have a lot of amenities that are set up that would be beneficial to an education type facility. It has full 3-phase power, 400 amp service, and a fiber optic head-end connection. We've also been looking at a mixed use where we could have a primary tenant that would keep the lights on, if you will, and keep the building exercised, and then have other groups cycling through in order to get full use of the property. We've also been interacting with the trustees of the 99 Mill property, the Mill Stream, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, that is the site that Mr. Green started purchasing and developing back in the 60s, I believe, and it has a 3/4 replica of the mill site and the various buildings throughout. The 2 properties tie in very amicably and as a gateway area into the bike trails and the Murphy soccer fields and the neighborhoods around. We've had some very productive discussions with them about possible uses for either a gateway there, field trips, museums, those kinds of things. in order to make the two properties viable. Finally, we've also recently started to look at the site as a function venue. One of the members of the public, this is the great benefit to having everyone being involved, presented to the committee what other communities are doing with these kinds of properties, and had made a wonderful presentation to us about a number of sites that historical committees in other communities make use of these type of properties. We've created a website that's out there for everyone in town to be able to look at. For some reason, I don't see it popping up here. Oh, there it is. Okay, apologize. But if you go to the town website, will be the first committee site that's listed. If you're interested, there's both a 5-minute and 30-minute video of the interior and exterior of the buildings. The current state of the property, as you see it here, is pretty much as purchased. The view on the left is looking from the 99 Mill property towards this federal-style building. The view on the upper right is as seen from Mill Road. Rather interestingly, the view on the bottom is seen back from the corner of the Murphy Fields, looking back out towards Mill Road, and that property area is deceptively large. And the reason to mention that is, again, because of the public input. We're looking at it as a venue site. Now, this is a slide for the Asa Whiting House that Sarah Pereira was able to present to us. It's in Holliston, Mass. They rent this out for a number of functions. They do both a house, the barn, and the tent, and they run through the Holliston Historical Society. And for the approximate price of $1,800 per outing, they're able to bring people in and have very wonderful sessions. So with that being said, in order to do any of those activities that we've talked about, whether it be single use or something like the venue, we want to fully evaluate the structure and determine what the condition of the property is and what types of accessibility might need to be required in terms of changes or anything like that. And that's the reason for the $7,000 request this evening. Take any questions that you might have at this time.
Thank you. It is time for question and answers, if anyone has any. There being none, does the... Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to the current speaker, Jim Lane from Precinct 7. Bill, did you have any communication with the school administration and their facility assessment? Because it sounded like when Dr. Lang was giving his presentation, they were going to include this building as well.
Actually, yes, that's the reason for the second meeting that we had with the school committee. We toured Dr. Lang and Mr. Rigney through the property in August to be able to present to them what the interior of the facility looked like and to be able to give them an opportunity to understand what was there as part of the town evaluation. So they've seen that property, and the timeline that they're looking for probably merges in with the completion of our activity, so we can come out with one or two best recommendations for the property.
So this $7,000 that you're seeking is in addition to the $200,000 that we've already approved for them?
This is completely independent of anything for the schools. Our mission is to determine what the best use of that building may be. If it's determined that the school committee can use it and they're able to leverage the information that we have, that's fine. But we're not enslaved to one solution. We're looking at what's best for the town going forward. As you see here, the idea of a venue may have its own, may be able to stand on its own merit, and that would be one of the recommendations we give to the town.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5, former planning board member. Just a comment, that property is zoned residential, right?
I'll need to defer to Evan to confirm this, but it is, but it does have we have had the education facility there before.
Well, right, and education comes in under the Dover amendment, so it doesn't have to comply with zoning, but if you were to go with a venue, would you probably be coming for rezoning? My concern would be is it could be considered spot zoning, and I just want to let you know before you go down that road that you investigate it before it comes back to town meeting.
Appreciate the input, Sue. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee recommends approval of this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
The board recommends favorable action.
Thank you.
George Zaharoulis, Precinct 3. Has any discussion taken place with the Permanent Building Committee?
Not at this point. We're still in the process of gathering information, and we do have the biweekly meetings. We encourage folks to come down, and we have been reaching out to all the different departments in town.
So you had no input from the Permanent Building Committee on this?
Not yet.
Thank you.
Okay. That is actually the beginning of discussion, even though it sounded like question and answer. So if anyone has any further discussion on the warrant article? There being none, we will now vote. An affirmative vote is to authorize $7,000 from free cash for a structural and building code analysis of 101 Mill Road. Final vote is 99 in favor, 24 opposed, 4 abstentions. The article passes. Article 13. Mr. Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 13 is sort of the final budgetary article that pertains to the free cash and sort of closes the operating budget cycle. We're requesting a transfer of $681,046 from free cash to the General Stabilization Fund, and I'll sort of explain where this number comes from. You may recall back at the 2015 spring annual town meeting, the town meeting appropriated $500,000 from the General Stabilization Fund as a funding source for the current year's operating budget. And it was clearly explained at that time that we would bring forth the request at fall town meeting once the towns had closed its books and had its undesignated fund balance certified, a request to replenish that money back into the stabilization fund so that we were truly carrying our ongoing costs with our ongoing revenues and sort of, acting in a fiscally sound manner. We also need to set funding aside for the unresolved collective bargaining agreements with the 2 police unions that I mentioned earlier, because we anticipate that those agreements will be approved and brought for your consideration possibly at spring town meeting, or if not at a special town meeting after the tax rate is set and the year is moved forward. So if the action on these articles is approved, the stabilization fund balance, which is currently $8.239 million, would be added to $681. It would bring it to $8.9 million, which would put us right at that midpoint that Finance Director John Souza alluded to earlier in his presentation of the midpoint of our range of our financial policy for a $120 million operating budget for the community. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now is the opportunity to question the proponent. Are there any questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Yes, the Finance Committee recommends approval of this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board recommends favorable action.
Thank you. Now is the time for discussion. There being none, this requires a 2/3 vote. An affirmative vote would be to authorize the funding transfer of $681,046 from free cash to the stabilization fund. Final vote is 128 in favor, 1 opposed, no abstentions. The article passes. Article 14.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 14 is a policy question for the community that deals with our town finances and is brought forth by the Board of Assessors. And they're going to seek the town to adopt a provision of state law that would establish a minimum value for personal property subject to taxation in the amount of $5,000. And so with that, I'll introduce Frank Green, the chair of our Board of Assessors, who will do the presentation under this article.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. This article deals with business personal property. Business personal property is for businesses that have office fixtures, machinery, and equipment that's used in the conduct of business. This article seeks to limit that to $5,000. Chelmsford issues bills for personal property about 900 accounts. The top 10 accounts of those are 68% of them are caught up in 68% are caught up in only just a handful of accounts. There are 329 accounts that are valued at $5,000 or less, or 0.5% of the entire personal property valuation. For the 329 accounts, that generates about $15,400 in tax revenue. The article seeks, once again, to establish a minimum of $5,000. Anything that is assessed for $5,000 or less in terms of a business property account would not be taxed. This would take effect in fiscal 17 if acted upon. The majority of the accounts that go uncollected are less than $5,000. These delinquent accounts are often time-consuming and require expenses that exceed the value of the outstanding taxes. Once all remedies have been exhausted for collecting these, we end up writing off as bad debt, if you will, for up to $6,000 to $8,000. This represents about 0.2% of the total amount for personal property. Of the 351 communities, 166 have adopted this provision. 49 have adopted $10,000, which is the maximum amount. 38 have adopted $5,000, which is what we're seeking here today, in increments in between $6,000 and $7,000 and the like. This is an important note. Eliminating these 329 accounts does not reduce the tax amount raised, but rather the $15,400 is absorbed by the rest of the levy base, both residential, commercial, and industrial. Once again, the amount to be raised remains the same, it's just the valuation is reduced. This has the effect, would have had the effect in fiscal 15 of raising the tax rate by 0.0033 or 0.3 of a penny. This is illustrated here. For fiscal 15, we raised through property taxes just over $87 million, the full and fair cash value at $4.6 billion. You can see the 1870 tax rate that we all had. If we had adopted this last year, the full and fair cash value would have been dropped by $823,000, but the levy would have remained the $87 million, and that would have been the effect of the 0.3 of a penny. This, and again, it's roughly $15,400 that's basically spread around the rest of the entire base. I'll take any questions.
Maybe not. There appear to be no questions. That having been said, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee recommends approval of this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommends favorable action.
Thank you. At this point, is there any discussion on this warrant article? There being none, we will vote. A vote in favor would set a minimum personal property amount for taxation at $5,000. Final tally is 116 in favor, 10 opposed, 1 abstention. The article passes. Article 15.
Article 15 deals with domiciled military personnel. Vehicles owned by registered or leased military personnel who are domiciled in Massachusetts are exempt from motor vehicle excise if the town adopts this particular provision. The service person have to be active military duty outside of Massachusetts for 45 days of the calendar year. The military personnel who qualify or own or lease more than one vehicle for personal, non-business use may have the exemption applied to the vehicle of their choice. In trying to get a sense of how many military personnel this might take into account, the DOD doesn't really release that kind of information. In talking with Regina Jackson, we think there might be a dozen, maybe less, but we really don't know. The typical excise bill is roughly $120, and that would be exempt if they qualify. It would be an annual submission, an annual application.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions for the proponent?
Hi, Pam Armstrong, Precinct 3. I'm not against this. I think it's a great idea, but is there a time frame that a mother couldn't decide to put the car in her son's name so she doesn't have to pay the excise tax if he didn't actually have a car?
It has to be in the military, the military person's name.
Well, if he was in the military, but he didn't own a car, could another family member, now register? Do you have to have the car in your name a year prior to military service, or?
Certainly the year within the excise tax year.
Okay.
The beginning of the year, which is recognized as January 1st.
Okay.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. What are these funds used for?
I'm sorry?
The excise tax funds, what are they used for? Do they go into general funds, or are they specific use?
The general funds, I believe, used for the maintenance and upkeep of the roads is what they're targeted for.
So basically what we're saying is that these folks that are serving the country that are not using the roads wouldn't have to pay into the fund to maintain the roads.
Well, if they're deployed
for the
outside
period,
of Massachusetts.
For the period they're deployed outside.
Right, for that calendar year.
Okay.
Could be used for anything, but just
Any further questions for the proponent?
go back into the general.
There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee took no action in this article.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action.
Okay. Now's the time for discussion.
Jerry Mead, Precinct 6. I support the motion, but I wish that a similar exemption were available for people performing non-military national service through such organizations as the Peace Corps or Teach for America.
Thank you.
That's a good point.
Any further discussion? There being none, we shall now vote on Article 15, which provides motor vehicle excise exemption on one vehicle for residents in active military service. Final tally is 125 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. The article passes. Article 16, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 16 is an action we're asking you to take, and this pertains to a wet piece of property that the town acquired for delinquent tax payments, and we're asking to transfer the land to conservation purposes. Let me just orient you with the property. I know it's hard to see on the map, but basically we have this parcel of land off of Proctor Road at Buttercup Lane, as the address indicates. The parcel itself is 6.73 acres, and it's essentially wetlands, which is why the assessed value for the property was only $8,100. And after years of tax delinquency between delinquent payments, interest, and so forth, the amount owed was $2,008. And why we're seeking this action for this unbuildable parcel is it directly abuts 14.12 acres of conservation land that is held in that area by the Chelmsford Land Conservation Trust. And so what we always try to do is to expand conservation corridors, but in this case, it's really not going to have any material impact other than just a wider recognition of conservation land, because as I mentioned, the land is soaking wet, which is why it became to our possession by the developer of the Buttercup Lane subdivision. The other question is, well, why not transfer it over to the Conservation Trust for their purposes if it's no purpose? Well, the problem with that becomes it then becomes a procurement issue or an act of the legislature to go around the procurement issue. And in this case, it has no material impact until such time that some science or technology allows anybody to do anything with wet property. It's just not habitable. So what we're seeking this evening is to just expand this conservation corridor, because otherwise we really don't foresee any sale or other disposition of this property, because if it were such a case, it would never have gotten to our hands as a tax possession anyway. So we're asking the town meeting to do a formal designation of this wet parcel of land for a conservation status, so that we can then depict it on our maps as a conservation corridor. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Now's an opportunity for questions and answers.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. Paul, has the Conservation Commission submitted any plans of what they'll do with this land?
No, because they can't do anything with the land. It is a swamp, for lack of a better words. It's wetlands that is unusable. In essence, you can't do anything with it because of its wet status, like any other active wetland. So they do not have any plans for it. Much like the previous owner had no plans for it. It is going to remain in its current state and really have no impact on the abutting property owners.
I had heard that at one point the Chelmsford Land Conservation Trust had some interest in this land, of adding it to the Knoll pasture property.
Yes, as my due diligence and in accordance with the town meeting's policy and preference to notify abutting property owners, I did notify the Land Conservation Trust that this land parcel was available, and explain to them what action I was taking in terms of that we ought to put a formal designation on the land, even though it has no applicable use. But as I described earlier in my presentation, I'm not seeking the route of a special act of the legislature or other type of procurement action to designate it to the Conservation Land Trust, because again, there's nothing you can do with the land. It is wetlands. And so in essence, much like we've done with the water districts and others who are joint town lands, we keep town ownership. And in essence, if there is some issue that goes out there, it would be the town's responsibility. In terms of if somebody were to illegally dump materials or something of an unfortunate nature, much like we probably have to do it today anyway, because again, we've got nobody who owns the property. So yes, short answer is the land trust is aware of it, but again, it has no impact on their use, which is a pasture land, which is dry in terms of their property that abuts it there. And then as you go up, it obviously goes to the Parley land again. So again, the reason that this land wasn't conveyed to either Parley or otherwise is because of its wet status.
Question for the moderator, perhaps to be channeled to council. What would be the process today, as the land sits, to transfer it to the land trust?
I assume that you mean that if there was a warrant article that authorized the town meeting to vote for it in such a way.
If there were a warrant article to authorize that transfer, what would be involved in making the transfer?
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, so just like town meeting is being asked under this article to transfer the land to the Conservation Commission, there would have to be a warrant article authorizing essentially the disposition of the land to a private party, and that would require a 2/3 vote of town meeting. The actual extent of the procurement process that would be required would depend upon what the value of that land was, and so the town would have to undertake an appraisal, or at least determine the value of the land. And depending upon what that value is, either the town would have to issue an RFP for the disposition, but if the value is less than $35,000, the town could dispense with those advertising requirements. But then there would be legal fees associated with preparing the deed, and transferring the land, and paying legal fees and recording fees.
If the land, through this article, transfers to the Conservation Commission, and there is future interest in transferring it to the land trust, what would be the process?
If town meeting approves this vote tonight, the land will be held by the Conservation Commission for conservation purposes. So any future disposition of the land would trigger Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution, which would require not only a 2/3 vote of town meeting, but it would also require a 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature to dispose of the land, even if it were to remain in conservation use.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. I'm also a director of the Chelmsford Land Conservation Trust. I just have a clarification. If this land, through the moderator to
Go
town
ahead.
council, if this land was obtained through tax title for delinquent taxes, doesn't it not go into Chapter 97 because it was obtained for delinquent taxes, and we didn't use Chapter 97 monies to buy it?
Well, the case law is not entirely clear on that point, because yes, it was acquired for tax title, but once you transfer it to the Conservation Commission, it's then held for conservation purposes. So that's the distinction. It would not have been originally acquired for conservation purposes, but the subsequent transfer by vote of town meeting would put it into conservation use. And as I said, the case law actually is a little bit muddied on this, but we would recommend that if it was to just be disposed of in the future, that you follow the Article 97 disposition procedures.
Okay. And one other point of information, I believe this parcel was open space parcel designated as part of the Buttercup Lane subdivision. So I believe that probably has some restrictions on it to begin with, and that may have been why it was not paid, the taxes weren't paid on it, because it was of no value and it was already open space. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
We took no action in this article.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Selectmen recommend favorable action.
Okay. Any discussion? There being none, we'll vote to transfer the property on Buttercup Lane to the Conservation Commission. An affirmative vote would authorize the town to do that. And it requires a 2/3 vote? Doesn't even say that.
Yep. It's a transfer of land. It's a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
So this is a pretty straightforward article.
Yeah.
I see the next two coming up having to do with zoning bylaws, including
Final tally is 124 in
affordable
favor,
housing to be
2 opposed,
significant, and I
no
suspect this will be
abstentions,
the end
so
of the
we
meeting for
do
this evening.
attain the 2/3 threshold. Article 17, Mr. Manager?
Mr. Moderator, I'd ask that recommend that the town meeting adjourn for this evening session at this time. due to the prolonged nature of the upcoming zoning article, which will probably take some considerable time at Thursday's session.
So I have a recommendation. Let's have that in the form of a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Moderator, I make a motion to adjourn until the 22nd at 7:30 p.m. this location.
Thank you very much, and it's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? See you on Thursday. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a good idea.
So, folks, this has been a pretty rapid fire and efficient town meeting. I think John Curland has come into his own as moderator with just the right touch of firmness but inclusiveness. We went through a lot of material this evening. The biggest item was the dispensation of $2.2 million in free cash left over from the last fiscal year, and that was divvied up as follows. $453,000 went to pay for last winter's snow removal over budget. $500,000 went to the Chelmsford Public Schools. $294,000 went to tax relief to keep the increase in taxes from getting their maximum. $191,000 went into the sewer construction stabilization fund, and then there were 4 articles having to do with studies, each of which took a little bit of that free cash. $15,000 for an analysis of the Chelmsford Forum, whose lease is up in 2 years. $200,000 for a school department space needs. Looking forward to the possibility that we will need to reconfigure the school somehow. $10,000 for signs, which was the long duration article for the evening. It taking about 45 minutes or so to decide to spend that $10,000. $7,000 to do an analysis of the 101 Mill Road property, and then finally $681,000 going into the stabilization fund from free cash, and so there you have it. Then there were a series of smaller scale warrant articles, and then the 3 big ones, well, 2 big ones that remain for Thursday night have to do with affordable housing and the notion of having a contractor come in and instead of building say there were 20 lots and some of them are going to be made affordable housing, instead of that, to allow that contractor to either provide property or to provide money to the housing authority here in town, so that that's a conveyance of worth that then the housing authority could use as it sees fit. We'll see that played out on Thursday night. We hope you'll be joining us then. I'm Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia, thanking you for joining us and looking forward to seeing you on Thursday. Good night.